learn, Father, how we can truly touch other people's lives to be able to reach the whole city and a part of the city, God, that will probably never walk into our churches. So we'll need to go to them. And so I pray, Father, with the power of your Holy Spirit, knowledge of your word, and the love for the people, that you'll give us the opportunity to see Muslims come to know you right here in Buffalo. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Okay, so I'm just going to give a brief little story to you. Sometimes we think our toolbox doesn't have the right tools to start something big, right? Oh, I could never do that. Let me tell you, I have never been to seminary. I am a nurse. In fact, I was in hospice when the Lord healed me to come and do this work. And I was actually working with Open Doors. Ever hear that? Voice of the Martyrs. And I was working with a group of people with South China. When the Lord called me to go to Muslim people. And one day my daughter and I were doing some pre-college shopping. And we were at the mall, something like a Labor Day, Memorial Day, something like that. I told my daughter, I said, Jillian, shh, quiet. Do you hear any English being spoken? I've never been to seminary. No. Let's walk that way and listen some more. I said, Mom, what are they speaking? I said, many things. I don't have a clue. I said, but that's not the question. The question is who's reaching them? And is there anything going on? Because these people in China. I said, we've got to discover and research to see if there's anything happening to take Jesus to these people. Then we went about 40 minutes south to an outlet. And again, she says, Mom, I don't hear any English down here either. I said, no. I said, but I do recognize some of these languages. I said, some of that is Russian. I don't think there's anything happening to reach these people. And so I took my sorrow to the Lord because my heart was immediately broken for these people. And I wasn't really sure what the Lord had in mind. But he would slowly reveal to me that what he had in mind was that we would take language learning to the people. And I thought at first that it would maybe be in an apartment complex or something. But we actually began the very first work in Chinese restaurants. We taught menu English. And it was desperately needed. The people were coming in out of Southeast China, and they were actually being trafficked. They knew they were being trafficked, but it was better than what they had at home. So they agreed to it. They were working 7 days a week, especially if somebody had to go to Chinatown. And they were working from sun up, like 7 a.m. until 11 p.m. There would be a dozen mattresses in a house, and they would all flop in that mattress and get up and go back and forth. I thought, well, what's being done about that? What's being done to help these people? And the Lord laid on my heart that there was nothing. So at that time, I was also working as an intercessor. That meant 4 to 6 hours a day, typically speaking, praying. So I really learned to hear the Lord. And that's really important, that we take time to hear the voice of the Lord. Because if you know how to hear the Lord, that's going to be so much more valuable than a formal education. You can get all the formal education in the world, but if you can't hear the Lord, that's not going to guide you in your work. So over time, the Lord would reveal that he had a much bigger plan than my little plan. And one day I was driving through all these apartment complexes where I thought I was going to be teaching. The Lord said, turn right. And I'm like, how big. And I went up there, and there was this great big YMCA there. And I was like, Lord, I haven't sat hours and hours before you on this decision, and I don't know whether to go in. So don't let me screw it up. So I walked in and I looked at the lady. I said, "Hi, my name is Kim Carr. I'm recently certified to teach English as a second language," which is really fast speaking for where I'm from. It would be, "Hey, how y'all doing? Is the manager anywhere around? Oh yeah, he's way down there." You know, be very slow and relaxed. So this manager finally comes in and he's like, this tall. "Hi, my name is Kim Carr. I'm an English as a second language teacher." You know. And he looks down at me and he says, "Follow me." So I start down this hall and I'm thinking that this hall is 10 miles long.
It's on air.
Wait for the Lord. What are you doing? Get the hell out, you idiot! He comes in and he firmly shut in his door and he said, "Sit down." And he shakily sits down, this mountain of a man. He says, 12 hours ago, we were just praying. And we said to the Lord, we have all these internationals and we have nobody to work with. He said, and now you show up on my doorstep. I am a former journeyman with the Southern Baptist Convention. I married a Korean wife. And we would love to help you. What do you need? How about a building, textbooks, and child care? He said, yeah, when do you want to start? Next month? And I'm thinking, you idiots, just you don't even have a team, you don't have any money, you are one low ranger. We actually ended up spending another year in restaurants while we planned, built up a team and built up a program. And fast forward all these years later, and now we have a team of over 100. We teach 10 subjects. We've taught over 3,000 students from over 100 countries. But your takeaway here is no seminary, sitting before the Lord, nurse, but a heart for the nations. You give the Lord your heart, He'll take care of the rest. He will show you, He will direct you. There were times when I would lay my head down on my desk and sob because I did not have work on them. When we had to eventually kicked us out of there for being too evangelical. When Ray left, they didn't want us anymore. So we were renting in a very pricey part of town in a business office, and we were renting 4,000 square feet, paying $3,600 a month. I just put my head down. I would pray inside. I'd go get the mail, and there was the money. Money was always there. The school has never been in debt. And all the bills have always been paid. And He has always brought people to serve, people of great excellence like Usha and Matt, who are part of the executive lead team. So step out. Remember, you got to put that foot in the water before it parts. The Lord isn't asking for credentials. He's asking for your heart and your obedience.
Amen. All right, are we ready? Everybody awake? Well, let me get a drink of my coffee. Okay, we're on page 6 of the notes. Let me get turned on here. There we go. And while you're turning to page 6, we got a video. This video is fun.
Once the stronghold of forces loyal to captured dictator Saddam Hussein, the city of Tikrit, here in northern Iraq, is now firmly under the control of American forces. Or is it? These members of the Iraqi resistance movement, still loyal to Saddam Hussein, think otherwise.
The Americans tell lies. Each day our forces grow stronger. Each day we move closer to our goal of driving the infidels. What are they?
Nothing, carry on.
Driving the infidels from our motherland. We are not afraid to die. Are they subtitles? They are, aren't they?
No.
What do I need subtitles for? Can't you understand what I'm saying? I studied English at the bloody American University in Cairo.
Well, obviously I can understand what you're saying.
How do you see how they condescend to us, these subtitles?
Oh, maybe it's a teletext, for the hearing impaired.
Teletext.
No, and lots of TVs come with teletext nowadays.
Wait, say something again.
My friend has an epic.
Hey, how come he doesn't need subtitles? No, if I speak perfect English, she says fiction, private fiction, private fiction, second fiction, second. Router, I can
The situation remains as dangerous and volatile as ever here in northern Iraq. While the rebuilding continues.
What? I can't understand you speak English. You think
Tear down Iraq.
Shut up!
It's a silly video, but it does have one thing that I did want you to pick up on, and that is that the guy says, "Oh, do you see how they condescend to us?" And everybody thinks that the way they do things, the way they speak, their culture is right, and everybody else's is wrong. By nature, man is ethnocentric. Now, that doesn't make them racist. What it means is they're culturalists. They think that they're right all the time. And if you don't do it the way you do it, then the other people do it wrong. And what I want you to see from this class is there are oftentimes different ways to do things, and they can both be right. Okay? And that's kind of where we're going with this. So this class is all about culture. And culture is shared knowledge plans created by a set of people for interpreting and responding to social realities. Well, that's a complicated definition to say it's the way we do stuff. And we do stuff together. So culture, you can't have a culture of one. Culture is something that you share. It's something that you do together with a group. It's also something that doesn't change very much. Culture does change. It never stays the same, but it doesn't move quickly. So culture takes time to change. We hear about cultural revolutions. And there are cultural revolutions because of such as like a technological revolution changes your culture. However, what you find is that culture inside the way the person's values are, the way that people, the way they perceive the world pretty much doesn't change from generation to generation. It takes a long time for those aspects of values and world perspectives to change. So a worldview is a culture's view of reality. Now, according to America, this is what Americans look at the reality. America, we're number one, yeah, woo! That's the Southern in me coming out. Now, up above America, that's uninhabited. Unimportant. Down there, south of America, they do our laundry. In the further south, coffee comes from there, maybe. Cruise ships go here. Santa's up there. It's cold way down here. In Europe, well, they're just a bunch of wimps. Commies are over here. Evildoers somewhere around there. Notice Africa doesn't even exist. They make our stuff. There's evildoers over here. More America over here. And kangaroos come from there. And that's the world as far as the majority of Americans are concerned. Wow. Is it true? I mean, that's kind of how we perceive the world. Okay. Now, hopefully this group is not going to see the world that way anymore. Here's how I want you to perceive the world. It looks like the world, right? But there's 3 different colors. So we're going to classify culture in 3 different ways. Okay? Actually 2, with the third kind of a mix. All right? Now, when I'm talking about culture, I'm going to talk about very big generalities. Big generalities. Someone's going to say, well, you're just making sweeping statements. Yes, I am. Okay, let me tell you, I'm going to be making sweeping statements. It's not going to apply to everybody all the time for every people group. But there's going to be aspects of what I talked about that you're going to say, oh yeah, I see what you're talking about in that. Okay? So you got the blue areas, they're cold climate cultures. Okay? Then you got the red areas are hot climate cultures. And you got green areas, which is kind of like a mix between the two. And you see in the United States, you got all this nice blue, then it gets more and more hot climate the further south you go, until you get to Florida, and Florida's kind of its own little thing. You got Eastern Europe, and it gets more hot climate culture. And I'm not talking about hot climate because we're talking about going into Siberia, but it does have a hot climate culture the further east you go in Russia. And Spain's a good mix. South Africa's a good mix. So what do I mean by this? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's start about this. Now, who brought Bibles? Yeah, raise your hand if you brought a Bible. All right, I'm going to pass out some verses to you. All right, now I'm going to ask you to look up these verses, and then when I ask you to read them, I'm going to say, okay, read it. So I need you to hold up your hand so I know who to pass. So I want you to remember this. All right, first of all, Acts 17:26. All right, Proverbs 18:24. Ephesians 5:16. Who's next? There you go. Romans 12:11. Let's see. Proverbs 15:1. Let's go. James 3:2. Who else? Anyone else? I got you already. All right, over here. Matthew 5:37. Anyone else on this line? Okay, I'm going to move on. Ephesians 4:29. Ephesians 4:25. Okay? Now, when we get to the end of this, I'll reassign more. Okay, Acts 17:26.
From one man, he created all the nations throughout the whole earth. He decided beforehand when they should rise and fall, and he determined their boundaries.
There you go. So God created from one man all nations of the earth and actually gave them boundaries. Now, this should say some really cool stuff to us. First of all, God is into people. God is into people groups. God is into ethnicity. God's into that. So when we're talking about culture, God's into culture. God likes the way we do things. And so there isn't any one culture that has it all right, and there's no one culture that has it all wrong. There are aspects of every culture that can be right. And when we're talking about culture, there are aspects of culture which are absolutely diametrically opposed to each other, but yet there's still a biblical basis for both aspects to exist at the same time. So that's what we're going to be talking about this. We're going to talk about what are the differences between a hot climate culture and a cold climate culture, and is there a biblical basis for some of this stuff? Wouldn't that be good to know? I think so. Okay. So hot climate culture, cold climate culture, we've got that on the board here. The hot climate culture people are relationship-oriented. The cold climate culture people are task-oriented. This is the high priorities. Who's got Proverbs 18:24?
18:24. A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother.
There you go. It's all relationship, companionship, but there's a friend who sticks closer to the brother. Relationship, being relationship-oriented is very important. Task-oriented. Who's got Ephesians 5:16?
Redeem the time because the days are evil.
Redeem the time. Time is important for task-oriented people. Get it done. Got to get it done. But yet there's this relationship aspect of Christianity. So here you got a relationship-oriented people. Person is more important than the task or time. But task-oriented efficiency and time are high priorities. Who's got Romans 11:11? Somebody did.
Oh, you said 12:11.
Oh, did I? Sorry. Oh, it is 12:11. Go ahead. I can't read my own writing.
Not lagging in diligence, fervor in spirit, serving the Lord.
There you go. Not lacking, being fervent, serving the Lord. Efficiency, time, high priorities. Let's get this done. Don't waste time. Redeeming the time, for the days are evil. Do not waste time. However, a person is more important than task or time. In a lot of cultures, you cannot waste time. How can you waste time when there's always more of it? If you're in Africa and you're talking about wasting time, they can sit and talk to people for hours and hours and hours and hours. And a lot of places in Africa, a lot of the cultures, they don't work that day if they got the money for food that day. Well, why do you need to work? I got money for food, I got clothing, I don't need to work. But I do need to spend time talking about what's going on, spending time with people, and you can't waste time if you got more of it. So, sounds weird, but yet that's the way things are in some places. Let's see. Talk first. With a hot climate people, you talk first, business second. Cold climate people, you get to the point. If you're talking to a hot climate person and you're conducting business, you see in a lot of places in the world they have these little, especially in the Arab world and South America too, these little stores. And you think, what keeps them open? Surely they don't conduct enough business. Well, business is all about relationship. Everything you do is about relationship. So people are going to shop there because they're related to the person or because they're best friends with the person. And so there's a guaranteed clientele, no matter how big or small your business is, because you've developed relationships. If you go to an Arab place of business, it's not uncommon for them to bring out tea, spend time. You'll talk first, business is second. Well, if you're and you're going to the grocery store, you see, they're like, do the stuff. They don't even talk to cashiers. They don't talk. Run the stuff through. Go to the next person. They're not interested in talking to you. They're not even asking, how are you? How's your day? They're not even saying hello. They don't care. They don't want you. They want to get to the point. Get out. You're wasting your time. So it's all about efficiency. But a hot climate, what they want to develop is what I call a feel-good atmosphere. And a cold climate, it's accuracy in communication. Now, here's how I explain it. Okay. Let's set this stage. You guys look like you're kind of sick. All right. Imagine you're walking down the street, and it's a nice summer day, and you hadn't seen your friend for quite a while, and she comes walking up the sidewalk, and she's carrying a baby carriage, they're pushing this baby carriage, and so she's had a baby, and you meet, you hadn't seen her, you look at me, and you look down, and there is the ugliest thing that you've ever seen. I mean, it looked like they set that baby on fire and put it out with a rake. It is ugly. And you look up and you say, how precious. Because at that point, accuracy in communication is not important. What you're looking for is that feel-good atmosphere. Are you following me on this? That feel-good atmosphere covers everything. You're always looking for that feel-good atmosphere. You never want to put pressure on your relationship at all, at any time, ever. You're always looking for that common niceties. And so, accuracy goes right out the window. Okay? So what you get then is high-minded people are indirect communicators, while cold climate people are direct communicators. Okay? Who's got? What was it?
General answer.
Word stirred up.
So, yeah, there you go. You want to get the atmosphere going. Who has Matthew 5:32?
537. But let your communication be made, for whatsoever is more than these.
Yeah. Okay, got the idea. We don't want to stir up wrath, but yet, that kind of both, they almost sound like they're opposed to one another, but yet they both can work. So what you want to do is freeze everything to find an offense. You don't want to find anything that would upset about. This can go to extremes. For example, somebody's in a hospital, and well, I've actually heard it be told that there's a story about an Arab person, and they're calling your relative to say that the spouse is not well. And so they're like, should I come home? No, your spouse is. She'll be okay, but well, maybe you should probably think about coming home. Oh, okay. Well, I'm on my way home. Well, maybe instead of going home, you might want to consider going to the hospital. Oh, so she's really well. She'll be okay. Okay, but she's in the hospital, and you might want to speak to the doctor. Okay, so I need to go to the doctor. Well, maybe not necessarily the doctor. You see, because she's really not well. Oh, okay, so how bad is she? Is she going to be okay? Well, she's not quite in the hospital room as such, so you might not go directly to the hospital. Well, where do I need to go? Well, you need to kind of go to the morgue. So through this whole process, you're leading this person in. Accuracy communication is not. They're leading them down a journey in their communication to something that's really bad. Okay? Now, for a direct person, what they're thinking is, you're lying to me. You're lying to me. Why don't you just get to the point and tell me so I can prepare myself? What they're thinking is, I am preparing you. I'm preparing you for a journey. Yes.
Whatever. People in all cultures have the aspect of work. Let's get busy. And then the people-oriented relationships.
There is that, yeah. But it's purported more for different cultures. A indirect person, a direct hot climate culture, or excuse me, cold climate culture, what you need is what you think. I had a friend from Syria, and he's a Christian, and he went on a missions trip to the Honduras. And so he'd come back from being on the missions trip, and I'd asked him to share for 5 minutes. Just share about your trip for 5 minutes to the church. And he said, well, shouldn't the leader of our group, shouldn't she share first? And I said, well, we've got actually tonight, because we have a morning and an evening service, you've got tonight, and we're giving her tonight's service to actually speak. I mean, she's got the whole service to share about the missions trip, but we just want you to just 5 minutes. And so he said, okay. So he comes forward and says, I've decided I'm going to let the leader of the group talk. And so he gave her the service, and she then spoke for 20 minutes. And the pastor's looking at me going, what did you do? And after the service, I went to my friend, who's Syrian, and I said basically the same thing. What did you do? He goes, I told you I wasn't going to do it. No, he told me he would. But in his mind, he said very, very clearly that he wasn't going to. Now, the reality is it's my fault, because I knew that. I knew that. In order to get the truth from somebody, from an indirect culture, is you don't ask the person directly, you ask somebody to ask. Because that way, I would say, like, could you ask him if he'd be willing to do this? Because that way, if he says no, he's not confronting me, he's not offering me offense, he's talking to a friend who has nothing to do with me, or nothing to, so there's this bypass. Are you seeing how this works? So so it doesn't offend the person. He can say what he wants to his friend because it's not directed to me.
So you get the truth
I get the truth that way.
from a third person.
From a third person. So it sounds complicated, but the thing is, culture is all about rules. And if everybody knows the rules of the culture, everybody understands the rules. But what happens is when we deal with other cultures and we don't know the rules, then we start thinking, well, what's the deal? These people are goofy. But for another person, they know automatically this is how you conduct things. There are things that we do as Americans that other people do not understand. They just do not get it. Why? Yes. Yes, well, let me move on. So because of the indirectness, yes may not necessarily mean yes, but in a direct culture, yes definitely does mean yes. Give me an Ephesians 4:25. Who's got that?
4:25 or 4:29?
4:25.
Okay.
Who's got that one?
I got 4:25.
Oh, okay.
Doesn't matter. Therefore, having put away falsehood, let every other of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another.
Yeah, speak the truth. Yeah, let your yes be yes. Speak the truth. Don't lie. Just speak the truth. So we can go. Cold climate. There's a reason to be a cold climate person. However, in a hot climate, directness is embarrassing. We don't want to embarrass anybody. We want to, again, you want to maintain that feel-good atmosphere all the time at all costs. Direct answer is just information. You know, I'm just passing on information. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect you. It's just general information. Hot climate people are group-oriented. In climate are oriented. Who's got Ephesians 2:19? Anybody? Or have I got it? Have we got to the end? We got to the end. Okay. I need your hands again. Ephesians 2:19. Here you go. Ephesians 2:19. I'll give you Philippians 2:12. Acts 16:31. 1 Timothy 2:4. Acts 2:40 something. It could be 47 or 49. Let's try 7. I don't know. And then last but not least, anybody? 3 John 7 and 8. All right. There we go. See, we're getting through this stuff. Group-oriented, Ephesians 2:19.
So then, you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God.
So there it is. You're no longer strangers, aliens, but we're all the same household. We want to be group-oriented. We want to be inclusive. Inclusivity. Individual-oriented. Who's got Philippians 2:12?
Philippians 2:12. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling.
Work out your own salvation. Kind of sounds like you're on your own there. You're group, but yet you're on your own. Okay? Group people, I belong, so therefore I have purpose. Your whole purpose is with your group. If you don't have a group, you don't have purpose. You have no reason to exist. Being alone is the worst punishment ever imaginable by man. If you really are really bad, they put you in isolation in prison. because that's the absolute worst punishment that could be done. An individual person, though, they stand on their own 2 feet. Oops. A hot climate people, they identify with their group. Oh, okay, just. There you go. I'm just ignoring her, pretending that she's not there.
That's very individualistic.
Let's talk about priorities for a second. Hot climate people, the priorities are this, and I'm a sweeping brushstroke. Okay, number 1 priority is God. That's a number 1 priority with the majority of hot climate people. God, number 1 priority. Number 2, the biggest priority would be your clan or your tribe. That's your biggest group. That's your biggest priority. That is the most important thing. After that could be depending on the nation or the people, could be nation, could be family. Okay? Somewhere. Now those two kind of change back and forth a bit. Nation or family. And the very last priority is the individual. Your own personal preferences are the last of any consideration. The very last. Compare that to a cold climate where, now I'm sorry if I'm going to offend somebody, we say that God is the number 1 priority for those who are Christians, but that's not true. That's just, I'm going to say that's not true. It's a lie. We say it, we do not live it. We think we live it, but everybody else knows that we don't. Okay? So I will say God's in there somewhere, somehow, but we're not even sure where He is in our own priorities, culturally speaking. Okay? I know that may shock some of you for me to say that, but I'm just saying it the way it is. All right? So our number 1 priority is self. Self is what it's all about. What I want. We knew somebody who was a pastor in California, and he became a missionary, and he said he was doing counseling for somebody, and he got to doing some marriage counseling, and the wife says, me, I do what I want. And so he was like, well, how are we going to work through this? She goes, me, I do what I want. Well, what kind of compromises are we going to do? Me, I do what I want. Basically, that's the attitude of most Americans. Me, I do what I want. And it's getting worse. It's getting more and more and more, and I say worse, but that's the cultural dynamic that we are focused on. Every bit of media, every movie, every TV show, it's all about to get your self-gratification at any particular moment of the day. Yeah. And that's what it's all about. Now, beyond that, the next priority would be family. But what is family? Well, let's talk about what is family. Family, kids, and spouse. But even spouse is negotiable nowadays. Let's face it. So family has become narrower and narrower and narrower. Pets. Risha says pets could be in family. Yes. And then that makes me want to hurl. Because go back to that ugly baby story. Just saying. However, family, when we're talking about family for the hot climate people, they're talking about parents, grandparents, cousins, second cousins, first cousins, third removed. They're talking about anybody who's related to you in any way, shape, or form. Big family. And yet we're always shrinking.
Wouldn't family and clan count?
Clan is even more. Clan would be anybody who's got your same last name. Okay? We're the same clan, you know. My clan's real small. I got the last name Reif Snyder. There's just not a whole lot of us. So, but if you got like Smith or Brown or Jones or Patel? The clan is big. It's big. Yeah. So, and that would be the clan. See, so it's clan's huge, and everybody in that same clan would understand we're tight. We're tight. You could have a clan of millions, literally. But we're tight. So, yeah, good question. With a hot climate people, wait a minute, yeah. Initiative depends on success. If you see, these notes don't always fit in at this point for a little while. They're not going to fit in. So you may have to make lines go this way and go that way. I've corrected it several times, but every time it seems like I collect out of it, it doesn't save. I don't know why. However, in cold climate people, initiative is good and is expected. Here's the thing. For hot climate people, depends, if you can imagine a corporate system. If you're one of the workers, and you don't want to put your head above any other worker. You understand? Because you're all in the same group, you're all on the same level. You don't want, you're not going to express your opinion because you don't have opinion. You're going to find out from all the workers what the opinion is before you present opinion, because your opinion is going to be the same opinion as everybody else. Okay? Then as you go up the corporate ladder, you begin to get a better focused opinion because your opinion starts to matter. Say you get promoted, your pool then of peers is smaller, and so you're going to get that collective, but it's going to be a smaller pool. Till you get to the boss who's number one, and he's going to have the ultimate opinion. Are you seeing how that works? However, in a cold climate, if we are a boss, we're looking for the person who shows initiative, who has that spark, so that they can rise up. It's the exact opposite for the hot climate. What they're looking for is that person who rises up and who's going to show spark. You knock him back down to put in his place. Because how dare that person? Who does he think he is? He's getting out of line. You see? See how that works? Move on. Hot climate, the behavior reflects on the group. Your behavior isn't just your behavior, it's the group behavior. However, in a cold climate, the behavior reflects on yourself. Who's got Acts 16:31? Acts 16:31. I know I gave it to somebody.
Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, and you shall be saved.
Yeah, is that the whole thing?
The whole thing? Probably not.
It might be. Just go ahead and read it, if you would. I just want to make sure.
So they said, believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, you will be saved, you and your household.
You and your household will be saved. Here's talk about behavior reflects on the group. You and your household will be saved. We've got in our mind, in our individualistic society, this idea of personal salvation. And I may step on toes here, and so don't stone me, please. But I'm coming from a missionary perspective here. Okay, so let me just say that from a start. Nowhere in Scripture does it talk about personal salvation. It doesn't exist in Scripture. Just saying. It does say work out your own salvation. I understand that. But yet you got verses like this which says, you believe and you and your household will be saved. Now, in Africa, if you want to get somebody saved, you go to the tribal chief in say Ghana. You go to the tribal chief, you talk to the tribal chief, and he decides what they're going to be. And if the tribal chief says, yes, you're right, we will now all be Christian, guess what? That tribe is now Christian. Everybody in there changes their belief because the tribal chief says, we are now all Christian, and now we will follow Christ. And that's the way it is. They've suddenly, you get whole tribes come to Christ just like that. Now that blows us away here in the West. We go, well, when did they make a personal choice? Their choice is the tribal chief's choice, and he says they are, and so they are.
Okay, stop.
I knew someone's going to wait a minute, this doesn't work. Yes, it does. Go ahead.
All I care about is what God thinks.
Yeah.
Okay. And the group decision is acceptable?
Absolutely acceptable. As a matter of fact, that's how a lot of salvations happened. They just said, we are now Christian. And you could argue with them and you can say, well, when did you make... He says we're Christian. I follow Jesus. That's the way it is. And you can argue with them all day, but it's group happening. That's how when you think about this, when you read Acts and you talk about the thousands that came to Christ in a day under one message, how did that happen? I'm telling you, you stand on the street and you start preaching, and how many people are actually going to hear you? Is it going to be that 5,000? They're not going to hear you. If you're lucky, you might get 100 that can hear you, but their families got saved. Suddenly, you had a whole group of people that came under Jesus Christ, and they said, "That's a house." I know this blows us away from our Western thinking, but they suddenly said, "Guess what, dear kids? We're all Christians. We follow Jesus." Okay.
The acceptance is that the leader, whether it be your father, your tribal chief, will only always make a decision that's to the benefit of everyone. And so they're not going to say, well, I'm going to continue believing this secretly. It just becomes a way of life. Which is, if you think about it, if you're born into a Christian home, that's how your children... They're singing all the Jesus loves me, this I know, but they're doing it because they believe their mom and dad. Not because they believe God, but because they believe their parents. And eventually they come in line, we pray, and make a personal commitment.
It's one of those things, again, if you're from that culture and you know the rules, that's the rules. And no one's going to argue with that, because the rule, if you don't go with the rules, then what are you? You see what I'm saying? It kind of freaks us out a little bit, but that's how a lot of work's done in some of these countries. Yes.
Okay. So we've always had to make a personal commitment, but in the meantime, they accepted the kingdom of God.
They would look at that as being a personal commitment.
They would look at that as a personal.
Yeah. See, we think of it in terms of individual. They don't think that way. Individual is the very last priority. To them, the important thing is how the group works.
I'm working with a Burmese church with a pastor who said at 14 they made decisions, like you just said.
Yeah.
And he said that was all cognitive. Okay. And then 4 years later, he's in his 30s and 40s. 4 years later, he made a personal commitment. And now he adheres to the personal commitment because you've been over here long enough.
But don't you find that's true for even the believer? Even an American believer, yes. They come to Christ, they really don't know what they're getting into. They okay, I'll accept this as being true, and they go up there and they make their sinner's prayer, and yet it's a growing experience. And then eventually they go, wow, look what I have in Christ Jesus. I've got an exchange of things happening. He has taken away my shame and given me His grace and given me His mercy, and He's taken away. But you don't get that from when you first come to Christ. And so they just say, okay, we're now Christian. And they don't know what that means, but they'll get it. They come under that knowledge.
It's the same thing as the Great Commission. Go make disciples, baptize them, then teach them all that I have commanded you to do. So if that is the model for this particular culture, then you have to work within it and then leave the rest up to God.
Absolutely. I know it's hard for us to kind of get that concept, but...
Well, we're going to work against ourselves if we try to force our model and our understanding of things on
Right.
culture that's not going to receive it.
That's right. And this is what's caused a lot of bottlenecks in missions work. And especially since we're talking about reaching peoples that are not like us, if we are picking off, for example, children, let me put it this way. In the Middle East, let me explain something. In the Middle East, pastors are legal, missionaries are illegal. Why is that? Because missionaries, as any good Muslim from the Middle East knows, is working with the CIA to destroy family units and to bring down the culture and what is good moral values. Because missionaries traditionally go to the individuals and try to make them make a personal decision. So you're pulling people out of family units, you're breaking down their culture, you're breaking down what is morally right and morally good. You see how that works? While pastors, on the other time, are inclusive and bring in whole families and bring people in. You see what I'm saying?
That makes sense.
So we have to think differently about how we do things. We're talking about inclusivity versus exclusivity.
Well, Paul kind of said something like that. He says, much as possible be all things to all men. And
Yeah.
In order for us to lead people to a relationship with Christ, then we have to do it through that cultural paradigm.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, moving right along, hot climate people are then inclusive, cold climate people are private. Now, as I begin to explain this, remember how I told you that in the United States it kind of gets more hot climate the further south you go.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, my mother was born in Oklahoma, and she was kidnapped at a young age and moved to Texas and Florida, and so she grew up in the deep South, and eventually she ran away and married my father at 16 and had me at 17. Okay, so my mom was very young, even though I thought she was an old lady. Everyone was always telling me how young my mother was, and she was young. You know, she's still in her 60s. You know, so she's young. Now, because she grew up in the South, my mom raised me as if I was in the South. Okay. However, I grew up in Ohio. I'm an Ohio farm boy in general, and so I'm living in a cold climate, being raised as if I was in a hot climate, which means that I'm really screwed up and I need a lot of counseling, okay? And so when I'm talking about some of the things, I'm talking about things that have actually kind of confused me as I'm growing up, okay? So when I'm talking about inclusivity versus private, this is some of the biggest issues that confuse a hot and cold climate people. All right? In hot climate, people are automatically included. However, in a cold climate, it's okay not to include everyone. Who had 1 Timothy 2:4?
I did. I was waiting, and I knew you were going to do that to me.
Yes, I'm doing it right now.
For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth.
Yeah, so God desires all to be saved. God's very inclusive. He's an inclusive God. He wants all to be saved. Not all is going to be saved, but he tries to be as inclusive as possible. I mean, he gave his own son, for goodness sakes. You know what I'm saying? He's done it all. So he wants to be very inclusive. Okay, however, in a cold climate, it's okay not to include everybody. Now, I had a friend who I had spent, he was from Indiana, and we're in Florida, and he's moving, and so I'm working at his house all day helping him pack up, and he's moving to to do some missions work in the Philippines, and so I'm helping him pack up, and I'm working all day in his house. He had some relatives in who's also helping him, and they're talking about getting pizza. You know, this evening we're all going to get pizza. Okay, we're all getting pizza. And I'm thinking in my mind, okay, we're going to get pizza. We're going to get pizza. Sounds great. It's going great. And as the day progressed, and they're talking about this pizza that they're going to get and everything, I slowly got the idea that I was not included in those plans. And had I had said something, they would have been like, what made you think that you would have been able to come along? Okay. Now, in Jacksonville, Florida, where we live, you're standing in line for grocery counters. You know, you're going to pay for your stuff. You're standing in a long line. You're going to just pick up on someone's conversation. You're going to jump right in. You're going to talk. You know, and you get these great conversations sometimes happening in long lines while you're waiting for groceries. You know, you talk about Jesus, you talk about the Lord, you talk about the weather, you talk about the kids, you talk about what's going on in the news. It doesn't matter, you just talk, right? I go up to my 25th high school reunion in Ohio. After living in the South for so many years, and I go up to my high school reunion, and I'm standing in line. I'm standing in line for the football game. They're doing the homecoming football game. And I tell you what, I was never into high school sports. I was a total neo-maxi zoom dweeby. I'm a nerd and a half. Yes, I'm a farm boy, but yet I was a sci-fi freak and all that kind of stuff, you know. And so sports, I could care less. But as a matter of fact, I got my varsity letter in chess. That's what big I was, okay? So anyway, I'm standing in line, and there's a couple, Kim and Lucia, come on. I want you to illustrate this for me. Yeah. Lucia, so we're standing in line. Okay, and there's a, come on. All right. And let's do it this way. So they're standing, nope, face each other. There you go. I'm standing in line, and they're facing each other just like this, and they're talking about the football team. Now, it's against my high school football team from when I was in high school. And they're saying what a great year they had. They could go all the way to state, and they're really excited about it. And so I said, I just reached into the conversation. I said, so it was a good year. Then they immediately, they turned this way, and they went, okay, and turned around like that and continued their conversation.
It was good looking if you worth it.
Guess when it went through all three of our minds at the exact same time? How rude. You see, hot climate people are inclusive, cold climate people are private. And it's okay to be private. So, hot climate people are inclusive in conversation, in meals, and in activities. Cold climate people are exclusive in anything they want to be exclusive about. Okay, now, when I was a boy.
I'm just curious. What happened to the pizza?
I went home by myself.
Oh, that's so cute.
Now, when I was a boy, we'd always lived miles and miles and miles away from my grandparents. And one year, we built a house out in the country, and so we were going to live close to my grandparents. Cool. So I got on my bike one day, and I rode my bike to my grandmother's house and knocked on my door, and she let me in, and we talked, and she gave me an apple and I think a Fresca, if you remember Fresca. Mm-hmm. And as we're leaving, she said to me, next time you come, call. Now, what I heard and what she said were two different things. Now remember, I was raised Southern. What I heard was, do not ever do this again, don't come back. That's not what she said. What she said is next time, call. Are you following me on this? What I heard was, do not ever do this again. Do not come back. Guess what? I never came back. Are you following me on this? If you're going to deal with hot climate people, you have to be prepared to be a pop-in person. Be a pop. Does anyone understand pop-in? It's knock on the door. You weren't expecting them. Oh, come right on in. Now they come on in. You've got them in your house. You're eating dinner. Now, hot climate people are inclusive in everything. Cold climate people are exclusive whenever they want to be. Nothing is worse when I've gone to a friend's house and they say, we're eating dinner, sit here and we'll be done in a few minutes. And I'm sitting there by myself. And I'm sitting there waiting and I feel awful. I feel as if I am definitely 100% not only not wanted, but I'm being an intruder, as if I was invading a private space, as if I was an interloper, as if I was so foreign and alien to them that they'd make me sit by myself. The greatest punishment for any man is for them to be left alone. Are you following me on this? If somebody comes to the door and you are eating, there's always room at the table for one.
And always extra food.
There's always extra food, especially here in America. Okay? Because if you have to do with a half a piece of chicken, guess what? There's always a meal around the corner.
Yeah.
Okay? You're not going to starve. So I would also recommend, just in general, if you really get into the groove of getting visitors, look at meals that may be easier, like chilies and stews and, things that might divide out a little bit easier. I'm just saying, if you get to where you're getting really into the international community and you getting visits, prepare for that. Think that you might get a visit. All right? Yeah, there you go. Am I making sense to you?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm glad. Because I tell you what, I grew up all messed up. Anyway, hot climate people. Possessions are used by y'all. Cold climate possessions are private. You must ask permission. Labeling is accepted. Excuse me. If you are a cold climate person and somebody uses your stuff without permission, they're stealing. That is not the case for a hot climate person. They're not thinking of theft. They're thinking, it's not being used, I might as well use it. That's all they're thinking. What's a possession? Who's got Acts 2, 40-something?
I've got Acts 2:42. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching.
I think it's 47. Try 47.
47. Okay. Praise God, and enjoy the favor of all people, and the Lord added to their numbers daily those who were saved.
All right, that's not it.
Acts 2:47.
I can't read my own writing. Oh, how about 49? 41? 40? It's 40-something. Give me a Bible.
45.
Who's got a Bible?
Which one do you
I want. All right.
49.
They have all things in common.
I mean, yeah, all things in common. Where is it? 43. Oh boy, that's way off of my right. Someone help me. Yeah. Sorry about this. Oh, okay. There we go. Oh my goodness. It's 44. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Boy, look at this. You'd never get 44. So had all things in common. Now that I'm not saying that we all need to be commies. I'm not saying that. But there's room in the kingdom for a little bit of grace. That's all I'm saying. You know, I was talking earlier, I think it was to Hal, about I used to work for postgraduate accommodation for Oxford University. And one of the things that used to come across my desk is people talking about theft because some foreigner who was also staying in the same group as them would come in, they'd see something in the kitchen, and they would just use it, and they would take it and borrow it. It's not being used, it's in the kitchen, it's in a common area. Who cares? It's free to be used. Now, from the cold climate people, they're thinking theft. Hot climate people, theft isn't. Well, theft, I didn't steal it, it just wasn't being used. Okay? Doesn't matter.
Happens a lot in the lunchrooms of
we had a case even at my office where he was laughing. We had a woman who very in her mind she's very cold climate. She doesn't think so, but she is, and she had stuff in there, and people were just eating it, you know, chips or whatever, and well, we're having my chips, and everyone's like, well, it was left in the kitchen, we're eating it, you know, and she, okay, here's the new rule. If it's on this counter, it can be, if it's on this counter, it's mine. And so, you know, okay, you know, and everyone knows the, but see, that's what culture's all about. It's knowing the rules. Okay? That's what it's all, so it created a new kitchen culture. Okay.
You were going to say created a new counterculture.
Excellent. Couldn't have said it better myself. Hospitality. Now, interestingly, both groups, hot climate, cold climate, they're both into hospitality. However, hospitality means different things to different people. With hot climate people, it's spontaneous. Again, be a pop-in person. Hey, come on in, okay? Cold climate, you got to plan for it. You got to plan for it. You call ahead, let them know. Let's put it on the calendar. 3 weeks from today, you can visit my house so that I can get it in order, get it cleaned up, get it ready. Listen, folks. Everybody knows that you live in your house. They're not there to visit your house. They're there to visit you. Get the idea that your house has to be out of your mind. It does not matter. It does not matter.
But you want them to be comfortable.
Comfortable? What's that mean? You know, I visited a friend's house one time. And the guy comes to the door, and he won't let me into his house. He won't let me in. And he stands on the porch and talks to me for an hour and a half. He won't let me in their house. He doesn't offer me food or drink. There's no hospitality. I'm sorry. He might have thought he was being hospitable because he talked to me for an hour and a half, and I felt like he really does not want to be with me.
Why'd you say that for an hour and a half?
Because in his mind, he's being polite. Okay. Again, it's all about relationship for the hot climate. However, in a cold climate, it's all about the special occasion. We're having an occasion here. It's an event. Okay? Hot climate, it's usually in the home. Cold climate could be taken out to dinner. It could be like, let's go do something. Let's go to the movies. Let's go. And so they're thinking they're being hospitable, but it's not taking you into their inner sanctum. They're being exclusive, even being hospitable. In a hot climate, guests don't pay. However, in a cold climate, guests are expected to pay. Again, I grew up really screwed up on this. Friends would invite me to a movie. My mom would say, sure, he can go. And I'd say, Mom, I'll need some money. He goes, he invited you. So you show up at your friend's house with nothing. And you get to the movies, and they're like, one please, and they go, what's your... And guess what? That was so embarrassing. Again, I'm telling you this because you're going to be dealing with people that if you invite them, they're expecting you to pay everything. It doesn't mean that they're taking advantage of you. You see, hear me say that again. It does not mean they're taking advantage. What it means is, according to their rules, if you invite it, you're paying. Now, if they come and just knock on your door, that's a different thing. But if you invite them, by the rules of hospitality, you're paying for them.
Unless you tell them. Unless you tell them that we're paying our own tickets.
Yeah.
And then that's their no. And
then they'll know. They may confuse them, but then they might think, well, then that's them being weird, you know. Okay. With a hot climate, people, food and drink are always provided. If you're in the South, here in the U.S., it's iced tea.
Sweet
I
or unsweet?
hate iced tea. I say, you know what's in the middle of Satan? Tea. I'm just saying, you know. So I don't like tea, but so growing up in northern Ohio, you have somebody over. Well, you might have tea, but you're going to have your juices, you're going to have your sodas, you're going to have your Kool-Aids, you're going to have a variety. But in the South, variety is not the issue. The issue is that you have something. Even if it's just water, you're going to provide a drink, and you're going to provide some sort of snackage. And whatever that may be. It could be a fruit. It doesn't have to be something elaborate. Just a little something. You know, here's a packet of M&Ms. Whatever. But there's going to be something. You see what I'm saying? Always. However, cold climate people, if you do step in unannounced, food and drink is not happening. Okay? It's just not. Moving right along, gifts are oftentimes expected for hot climate people. For cold climate, gifts are not expected. What do you mean by that? We go and visit the Saudis. They invite us over. We go to visit. We take something with us. It doesn't have to be something elaborate. It doesn't have to be something big. It just has to be something. Then we go into the house and we just leave it. We don't make a show of it. We don't announce that we're giving you something. And listen, when gifts are given or received, don't ever expect them to open them in front of you, because that's rude. That's like you would expect it. Now, they do expect it, but you don't want them to think that you expect it, because that shows lust and covetousness, and those are bad things. So we don't do that. So they don't open things in front of you. And here's another thing about gifts. Expect the re-gifting. Okay? If it's something that they're not going to use, they're going to just say, oh, thank you, because the gift isn't important. It's the gift giving that's important. Are you following me on this? And so you give something, and it's not yours anyway. It's theirs. So they can re-gift as they want. Okay?
That's not foreign to us. We do that.
Okay, cool. All right. You're all with me. That's awesome. So here's the thing. I know a lot of people who live in the United States. They've come here as immigrants. They want to go back and visit their families back home, but they've been in the United States for a long time. They're expected to take a gift for everyone that they know in their families back home, and so they can't afford to just get the gifts. They could go if they got money for plane tickets, they got money to go visit, but because they can't afford the gifts, guess what? They don't go.
Yeah.
Okay? It's that big of a deal. It's that big of a deal. Hot climate people, travelers are taken in. However, in cold climate, travelers may need to make their own arrangements. Now, my father, he was born in Iowa, and so he's an Iowan northern kind of dude. He had some relatives of his that were driving through Ohio who are southern by nature, and they called to visit my dad, and my dad directed them to a motel down the street. Guess what they didn't do?
They didn't visit.
They didn't visit. They didn't stay at the motel. They didn't even stop in the town. They just kept right on moving. Because they were told, as far as they're concerned, they were not welcome. Who has 3 John 7 and 8?
Are we talking about the book of John?
Yeah. 3 John. Not John 3, 3 John.
The epistle of John. In the back.
The letter. Yes.
St. John. 3rd chapter.
No, not the 3rd chapter. There's only one chapter.
There's only one. Oh, verses 7 and 8.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that for his namesake they went forth, thinking nothing of the Gentiles. We therefore ought to receive Christ that we might be fellow helpers to the truth.
Yeah, there you go. So they're talking about receiving and sending. This is not, in fact, it's actually very clear indication they're talking about missionaries there. They're talking about helping the missionaries to go out. So you receive them in, take in a missionary, and because they're going to the Gentiles to take the gospel, and you want to send them off. So you receive them into your home, you be hospitable to them, and you send them out. So there you go. However, in cold climate, travelers make their own arrangements. And there it is. That's hot and cold climate cultures. And you can see, what I want you to see in this is that even though that they seem like they're way, way different, there's still biblical references that you could say, oh, I can pull this out and pull this out and see how both of them can be very biblical based. Are you seeing that? I hope. All right. Let's take a 5-minute break.
Starting right
now.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't see you.
I was on your side last night.
When is great?
Monday.
I know.
Yeah. Pretty scary.
We're all still here and we need to go and fix those balls. There's
So it's just sort of mixed identity.
All right, well, you know, it's probably got to go out.
You know, if
Get up there.
Yeah, you'll have a blast. They're fun.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. We're not going to.
It's on my side of the bed. You know. He expects this much time off.
Somebody decided somebody put a sign in the refrigerator and it says, interesting habit, and have it at work. People putting names on the food. I just you don't see them have it. Oh, work your name.
But rubbing all up against what I meant what they want. But the morning, and every time it's down low for the actually just on the time days and try to search for it. And I used to be like,
all right. If we can return to our seats.
I think we need to go to the south and love is there.
This is the basis.
Hey man, it's pretty cold out here today. Imagine there are two minutes later. Just like I said, I'm not going to tie to a cold cold. I can. But now sometimes when it's sunny, then they were engaged. Now, every one of them,
And they made it.
All right. We're going to start narrowing our topics down to Islam here. Specifically.
Before we get started, where's the sign-up sheet? Back here.
That's right, we just signed in.
Want to wait?
Is everybody back? Pretty much. Just before we get started, we've taken a couple of pictures that we want to use in newsletters. So if anybody minds their picture being in a newsletter, can you let me know, and then I'll make sure that we'll just sort of make sure that your face isn't in there, because we're supposed to get some sort of a release on it to say, but because we want to put it on the ILC, when we send out a newsletter to say what we've been doing this weekend, and also for our newsletters. And also, if you want a newsletter, we don't want to clog up everybody's box, but if you want a newsletter, can you send Becca's address? People want an ILC newsletter, so that, what is that?
ILC
admin.
BUKA.
Right.
At gmail.com.
Right. So if you want a newsletter about what we do at the International Learning Centre, it's ilcbeka@gmail.com. And this is not a newsletter that you send to everyone willy-nilly, because we have situations that we do. In 1 week we had 2 victims of human trafficking. In 1 day, sorry, 2 victims of human trafficking, 1 death, and 2 victims of torture. And we need prayer support. That was in 1 day, on a Tuesday morning not long ago. So if we need prayer support, we're going to send you an email. But that doesn't mean that you forward it to everybody. Yes. Okay, so
no social media.
Yeah, don't put it on Facebook.
Circumstances.
Don't put our pictures on Facebook. And if you want a newsletter from Matt and I, if you send us an email at ushamatt@hotmail.com, that's ushamatt@hotmail.com, we'll just keep you updated with what we're doing as well. Because 1 or 2 of you have asked, well, how do you stay in touch? That's a good way. And I've got some business cards as well if you want one. But once again, we know your emails get clogged up, so we're not just going to send to everybody unless you really want it. Okay?
The first 5 people get a free trip to Buffalo.
1-way ticket to Iraq.
Who is she married to?
But you did notice the priority on that Usha Matt.
Don't you realize when you say I do, that was the last thing that
I've just gone to start introducing myself as Mr. Usha. And people go, oh, okay.
You can make up a name tag just like Ron, okay?
All right, moving right along. If I'm talking about the Islamic world, most people understand that this nice green area is the Islamic world. 86 to 100% of the people from those nations are Muslim. So you got, the Middle East, you got, getting into the stands down here, North Africa, Somalia, yeah. Let me just turn this down so you can see the colors a little bit. The blue areas, 66 to 85% of the blue areas are Muslim. And this year's Indonesia. This is actually the largest Muslim country by population. Indonesia, down here, and you're into Europe, right here in Bosnia. The gold countries, 36 to 65% of the people from those countries are Muslim. And of course, Africa lights up real nice up here. Again, more into Albania. 16 to 35% of the yellow countries. Africa really lights up real pretty. And I want you to see this. Suriname and South America. 17% Muslim in South America. Most of the Muslims there were brought in from Afghanistan and Pakistan to work in the sugar fields back in the day. And as far as I can tell, and I have been trying to research this, and there's so little information about the Muslims there. As far as I know, there are no missionaries or mission agencies actually reaching those Muslims or even attempting to.
In
Suriname. Now, there's people. Suriname has Dutch, and it's a Dutch colony, and so there's the Dutch. People are trying to reach the Dutch. People are trying to reach the indigenous Indians, but the Muslims, they're just ignoring them. 5 to 15% of the purple countries are Muslim. France, Netherlands, 10% in France. I think it's now up to 15% in the Netherlands, and they're saying that within the next 25 years, that the Netherlands, because of the population rise of the Muslims and the decline of the Dutch, that within 25 years it will be over the 50% Muslim point. Russia in Moscow is the outside of Istanbul. In Europe is the largest concentration of Muslims in Moscow. 8 million Muslims in Moscow alone. Most of the Muslims are in this area right through here. I've been to a couple of the Islamic capitals. I've been to Kazan. I've been to Ufa. I was talking with a pastor. I actually have a book published in Russian on Muslims in Russia, believe it or not. Not published here, but I am in Russia, which is kind of weird. But when we were bringing the books, the pastor in Kazan got so nervous about it because he'd actually been taken out of his church and beaten that he like loaded up about half the books. He kept a few, but loaded up about half of them and said, "Get these out of here," because he was really nervous. It's quite scary. The Middle East has been paying in Russia a lot of money so that each little village, and there's lots of these little villages around, that they've been building these log cabin mosques up into these villages. They look like little log cabins, except they got a green light on them, and they're mosques. And so there's an Islamic revival happening in Russia. Yes, believe it or not. There was a huge Christian revival that took place at the fall of the Soviet Union. That's now in decline. And now there's a huge Islamic revival taking place, and it's something that Russia is going to have to deal with a lot over the next so many years. And again, whoops, let's back this up here. South America, again, French Guiana. I think they're 10% Muslim. 2 to 4% Africa, or excuse me, not Africa. Europe lights up real pretty. United States, about 2%. Panama, 2%. China, Mongolia, Southeast Asia. What I want you to see is, this was the map I just showed you today. I want you to see the difference between today and the year 2000 in Europe. Europe has been targeted by Muslims. They're trying to immigrate as many Muslims into Europe as possible, and then once they get naturalized, they then are planning by birth rate to take over Europe. I've been told by many Muslims that their time is coming just because they're willing to have children. Okay? And when you're talking about the average Muslim household moving into Europe, and the United States is 7 children. You can see the math is quite breathtaking. Okay, relating to minorities. We're going to start with relating to minorities. We're on page 10 of your booklet there. And the number one issue with relating to minorities is respect. Respect. I cannot emphasize that enough. Respect. I was at a friend's house one time and working on their yard, and I was with another missionary guy, and we were working on this guy's yard, and they had a neighbor who was African American, and we accidentally kind of drove our car over onto his lot. This guy came unhinged. He came out yelling and screaming at us, and should I dare say swearing at us. And my friend was like, hey, I didn't swear at you, don't swear at me. And that just, and there was like a volcanic eruption that took place. This guy's going at us, and I said, sir, I apologize. We were wrong. I'm absolutely. And he goes, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. For most minorities, what they're really wanting is just respect. They're wanting to say, and I know he was wrong in how he approached things, but what he felt like was he was being dissed, and just when we're telling him how to speak, well, that just made things worse. And what he's really wanting is just some good respect. Okay? Am I making sense? Yeah. Good. If I'm not, I'm sorry. Having said that, I have a video.
Alright. No, I'm having a bit of a nightmare, actually.
What's the matter?
Well, I've had all the international CEOs from around the world in this room. In 10 minutes, the annual summit's supposed to take place. They've flown thousands of miles to get here, and my translator hasn't turned up. I need to find someone who can translate into 7 different languages.
Well, I can do that. Yeah, I did a TEFL in my gap year.
Welcome back to London, ladies and gentlemen. This is Helen Marsh, who will be our interpreter today. So, without further ado, let's address section 1.1, multinational profiteering for the financial year 2005-2006. Helen.
Hurdy-gurdy-gurdy. Hurdy-gurdy-gurdy. How are you? This is not my sandwich.
Totally goofy. But let me just say something. One of the things I want you to see in this, there's always something I want you to see, is it looked like the African guy at the end, he kind of smiled at the joke a little bit.
Yeah.
And just because somebody makes a joke and someone laughs doesn't necessarily mean they find it funny.
No.
Okay? Sometimes they will smile and laugh out of just being embarrassed. So here's the thing. Remember I said respect is the #1 thing. We're always looking for respect. And there's a thing, especially for Americans, that when we feel like we're relaxed and we're trying to be friendly, we joke. We're jokesters. And so we never want to joke at somebody else's expense. It comes across as being very rude and disrespectful. So, however, everybody likes to joke. Everybody, every culture likes to joke. But as we all know, jokes don't translate. So, what can we make fun of? What can we joke about? There you go. Ourselves. Keep all jokes focused this way. Okay, not at me. Okay. But keep them internal. Because, listen, if you can make fun of yourself, especially if you're dealing with other cultures and other peoples, then what they do know is that at least they can see that you don't take yourself that serious. And it relaxes them a little bit. It makes them a little bit freer to be who they are. Okay? I hope I'm making sense. Okay. So be aware then of respect. Be aware of racism. Of course, racism means that one person believes that their race is superior, or another person's race is superior over another race. Now, of course, that's not true. Our tendency is to be, remember I talked about ethnocentrism? Our tendency is to think that culturally that we're right and everybody else is wrong. But when you're talking about race, that's a different thing. You're talking about just because of your parentage or whatever that you're better or they're worse. The issue of racism is not determined by the person who is called racist, but by the person who racism is directed towards. Am I making sense? Yeah. In other words, whoever's judging what's racist or not is basically the person to who the racism is directed towards. If we're going to say, "Well, I'm not racist because blah 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 blah," you don't know. You don't know. The reality is, most people are somewhat racist. Most people are somewhat racist. We try not to be, and most people try not to be, at least in this country, because it's bad. But to some degree, we think that, well, because I'm this way and not, I'm not racist because it doesn't matter what you think. It's what the people around you think. Okay, that's the issue. All right, I hope that makes sense. When dealing with minorities, media is not your friends. Media is not your friend, ever. What do you believe from the news? Absolutely nothing. No, but what is the purpose? What is the purpose of media? Let me talk about that for a second. What is the purpose of media?
To sell advertising.
There you go. To sell advertising. How do they do that? How do they sell advertising?
By creating a want or a need.
Well, that's what the advertisers do, but how does the media?
Followership.
Propaganda.
What was that? I'm sorry.
Followership.
Followership. They want you to keep tuned in. The greatest way to keep tuned in is by generating fear. Media is about fear generation. If they can keep you tuned in, because if you don't, something bad might happen. Yeah. Are you following me on this? So they're going to stretch things. They're going to change things. They're going to make you want to be afraid. That's the purpose. And so when you're talking about minorities, they don't care about what's true. They don't care about what's right necessarily. What they're wanting to do is generate fear. Am I making sense? Okay.
Every night on the nightly news always characterizes something happening in Buffalo from the east side.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you hear that, that's a code word for black people.
Or Hispanics.
Yes.
Oh, I thought that meant
No. No time for jokes. And therefore, the whole city is gripped because they did it again from the east side. And, you know, that's the local ABC, NBC, CBS News. Been doing it all. We had a guy named Irv Weinstein. And he kind of like created this whole model of tonight, the east side. We've got a guy on the east side got stabbed or shot or something, and it just puts people in the grips of fear.
That's absolutely. So you know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Okay. So.
But the thing about media is, and what I've noticed too, is that they just don't do it one time.
Oh yeah.
They just like repetition, bang, bang, bang. They just beat it into you, like the fear factor, the fear issue. You just don't say it one time, be afraid of something. Like you don't want your kid to do something, so you tell them, just keep fear. Do it.
Well, both Lenin and Hitler said if you tell a lie often enough, people will believe it to be true.
That's true.
They were masters of propaganda. That's what Joseph Goebbels was all about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Good. So what we have to know is people are. I know we talked about cultures, but people are individuals, and people are people. And so, in order to deal with people, we got to get to know people. That's the only way we're going to deal with it. We can't base how we deal with people based on what other people say people are like in general. We just have to get to know them. It takes effort. It takes time. Because I'll tell you what, you did the study. We did the study on culture and everything. That's great. But until you get to know a Muslim, you're never going to get to know a Muslim. And so you can go by what the media says about Islam, and if you go by what the media says about Islam, you'd think that everyone's a terrorist. I've been in churches. I have been in churches where I've heard people who are born-again believers who believe that for God so loved the world, and they could quote it, okay, and yet will say stuff like, we should kill them all and let God sort them out. Let's nuke them till they glow. Come on, saints. We're talking about people here who will spend an eternity in hell. I don't want to see that. I don't care who they are. I don't want to see that. Our commission is to love. Our command is to love. And if we can't do that, we got no business calling ourselves Christians. Just saying. Moving on. Immigrants. Immigrants are interesting people. We're going to classify these, first of all, as arrivals. Some people generation, I'm going to call them arrivals. People who just get off the plane. Now that everyone comes in by plane. So usually arrivals that come in as immigrants, usually, believe it or not, are highly educated and highly motivated. These are people, usually, that have a high IQ and are motivated to succeed. They have usually a very strong, what I would call a good old-fashioned pioneering spirit. Think about this. These are people who are willing to uproot their whole families, move all the way around the world to a place they don't know, to start off a whole new life, and to create something better for their families and for their children and for generations. That's what they're thinking. Man, is there anything more American than that? I think not. Just saying. These are pioneers. So these people are, it's amazing how many taxi drivers I've met with doctorates.
Yes.
And yet they cannot fulfill their job in their chosen field because they don't speak English well enough. Just because someone doesn't speak English does not mean they're unintelligent. I know I'm speaking obvious things, but sometimes you got to say the obvious thing. Okay? These people are usually highly educated, and I'm reading a book right now called Immigrants and Religion. Oh, man, great book. And one of the things it's talking about is how immigrants, when they come to the United States, very often become more religious than they ever would be back home, because they're looking for, first of all, a sense of community. They don't have that community. Their community's been taken away from them. They're coming here. They're looking for community. And where do you find community? In church. In church and religion. But let's say, for example, you get here. You're a Muslim. because we're talking about Islam, right? You come here, there isn't a mosque. There isn't a community. You don't know anybody. What do? You start searching. When people are arrivals, when they first get here, this is the most ideal opportunity to share them the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is the time when they're most receptive. This is what they're looking for. And when they grab a hold of it, this is the one thing that's going to charge them and make them wanting to share the gospel. These are the people that are going to be ultra evangelists for the kingdom. These arrivals these are the people that's going to change this nation. They're going to rock the world. Are you following me on this?
Oh, no.
They then find that community, and they get established, and they build from there. That's what they're looking for. Then you get that first generation. These are the people who are born in a foreign country. Usha is a first-generation British person. Her family came from India, and she spoke Gujarati up until she was 5 years old, until she went to school. And when she went to school, what she knew was, Usha?
Yes, Mrs. Aston. No, Mrs. Aston. Thank you very much, Mrs. Aston.
Now that's what she knew to say. Now she didn't know what it meant. And so every time the teacher would talk to her, she would say,
Yes, Mrs. Aston. No, Mrs. Aston. Thank you very much, Mrs. Aston.
but guess what? By the time she was in 4th grade, she was at the top of her class. Right? This is that first generation. This is why, do you ever notice in the spelling bee why so many of them are Asians? This is no accident. Their parents are highly motivated. They're wanting their family to succeed. So you get things like the tiger moms. Okay? It's a real thing. It's a real thing. And they're going to make their children succeed. And so you get Asians that come to the United States, and their children are going to be doctors, they're going to be engineers, they're going to be something great for their family, because their family is going to rely on that next generation. And so they're going to succeed. Now, also, that next generation, they're trying to figure out where they fit in. Where do they fit in? There's a strong tie back to the homeland, because they grew up with all the stories. They grew up with their families talking about. Usha had never been to India until she was in her 40s. And yet she felt tied to India, because even though she'd never been there, because they spoke Gujarati in the home. Her mom and dad talked about India all the time. Their dad and mom would talk about someday moving back to India and everything. And even though she hadn't been there till she was 40, she felt tied to India. And so this first generation, they still feel tied to their homeland, and yet, listen, culturally, they've changed. Culturally, they have begun to assimilate into the country that they're living in. And so even though they can be in the home, they can be as foreign as they want to be. When we lived in, now bear in mind, Usha and I, we don't have any one kind of culture. We're just kind of a mismatch of everything in the world. But in our home, we had our home culture when we lived in Jordan. We lived in Jordan for 10 years. And our home was we spoke English in our home. It was our haven. I'm going to say this, and if you get offended by this, then so be it. There is nothing more offensive to me than you're in America, speak English. How many of you ever done a foreign language? How hard is it to learn a foreign language?
Very difficult.
It is hard. Listen, you've got these arrivals. They are motivated people. They are educated people. They are the best of the best. They're pioneers. They come here. What do they want to do? They want to speak English. They want to assimilate. They want to be the best Americans they could be here. They really do. And they're working it. But it is difficult. It is so difficult. And English doesn't have any rules for the language anyway. So you can imagine how much more difficult it is. So please do not ever say that, because they really do want to speak English. They're trying, but they also want a community as well. Usha was talking to some women, and they were working at Walmart in one of those nail salons. And where were they from? They were
Vietnamese. 25 years ago they came.
Yeah, they came 25 years ago. They were Vietnamese, and they were talking about when they came that they weren't allowed to speak Vietnamese at the salon because the Americans thought that they were talking about them, and so they weren't allowed to speak. So they would go to work, they would sit there and they'd do the work, and they weren't allowed to speak. They would go home to this individualistic society, and there was no one to speak. And so they were isolated, and they were alone. They would go to the store, and they would go to see things like Lucky Foods having dogs and cats on it. And so they would say, oh, gotta get this lucky food, because in their culture, the dog and a cat is a lucky animal. And they would be eating dog food and cat food. They would see things like a frozen pizza and see this beautiful pizza. Oh, I'll have that. Well, what do you do with a pizza? They open it up, it's frozen. And they would eat a frozen pizza frozen. They didn't know how to cook it. She actually said they put food in this nice white porcelain food cleaner, and they would turn it on, and the food would go away. It's not funny. This is what they don't know how to deal with living here, and they're struggling, and all we're concerned about is whether they speak English or not. For goodness sakes, it's time to grow up.
Amen.
Did I express myself clearly?
Yes.
Thank you.
Some of the most enjoyable times I've had is I only speak Spanish, because I don't speak that well. But when I work with other cultures, is the excitement and the enjoyment is trying to understand each other. You know, when Pastor Perta first came here, he spoke very little, but we had a ball the first day. I moved him in. You know, it was great. We had a blast.
Good.
My personal experience has been if you attempt to speak other person's language, that frees them up then to enter into a relationship.
Sure.
I spent some time in the military over in Okinawa, and the Okinawans got the biggest kick out of me stumbling with Japanese. But to them, I was showing respect for their culture and their language, and they were they would teach me, they would befriend me and show me how to pronounce and different things.
Yeah, isn't that it's as you said, isn't that interesting that other cultures are willing to say, let me help you, and we just say, no, you just do it. You see what I'm saying? And it's a good point. So you got this first generation, and they're trying to fit in somewhere. They're tied to their homeland. They're tied to their, but yet they're in the school system. They're growing up here. They're getting American friends. And here's the thing. I remember teaching on Islamic culture. It wasn't that long ago, to this group of Baptists, and there was a number of not small. They were teenagers, and they were telling me, "Oh no, you're not telling the truth, because they are exactly like us. They dress because of what we look at in America is pretty much we look on the dress and the outside, and we say, well, they're dressing like us, they walk like us, they talk like us, and they're assimilating. But when they go home, things are different." Are you following me? So they're still trying to figure out who and what they are. And so in that, it's again, if we can bring in a sense of community to help them determine that it's okay to be who you are in Christ, it's a great opportunity to reach them with the gospel. Then you get that second generation. By the second generation, assimilation has taken place. By the second generation, they already know who they are, and they've already established their community. That has happened. It is done. It is, as they say in Arabic, maktub. It is written. these are the hardest people to reach. In other words, you've got two generations. You've got our rivals, and you got that first generation. These are ideal candidates. But by the second generation, they're a lot harder to get. Okay? So, we're fishers of men. Yeah, right? Let's fish where the fishing's good.
Yeah.
Are you seeing? Not to ignore the second generation. What I'm saying is, let's fish while the fishing's good. Let's cast the nets where we know we're going to catch some stuff. All right? Hope I'm making sense.
You know, a good Southern boy knows that the fishing's best when the weather is stormy.
All right. Practices of law and culture. Let's see. Modern interpretations of Islam. We already talked about orthodoxy. I'm not going to dwell on that too much. 7th century revelationists. There are a group of Muslims, and predominantly Western Muslims, who believe that the Quran was relevant for the time of Muhammad and that 7th century, but isn't really relevant too much today. And they are a growing need. They are a growing group, I should say. Let me say, though, they still identify themselves as Muslim. When push comes to shove, a Muslim is always going to pick a Muslim over a Christian. It doesn't matter where they fit in, whether they're Orthodox or non-Orthodox. The fact that they still identify themselves as Muslim, they're Muslim. Now, they might talk about good Muslims and not so good Muslims, but they're still Muslims. Now, we, on the other hand, as Christians, we often talk about they can't possibly be a Christian because. They don't do that in Islam. It's not that they're a Muslim. They may be a good Muslim, maybe a bad Muslim, but they're still a Muslim. Okay? Spiritualization. This is the kind of a belief that you can spiritualize the Quran. So, for example, the jihad, which really is a term of war. It's become very acceptable now in our media and in a lot of the modern Western approaches to Islam to say that the jihad isn't necessarily a call to war as much as it is an internal struggle where one has to war within themselves to determine whether they're going to obey or disobey Islam, whether they're going to follow the creeds or not follow the creeds. And so that's this battle within themselves. And so, but is that really what they're talking about in the Quran about jihad? No, not really. But they spiritualize it, you see. And then you have folk Islam. Now, folk Islam is the mixing of animistic practices within Islam. There's a lot of magic and anyone ever heard of the evil eye? You know, kind of the idea of rituals and magic and demonic influences and things like that comes into it in an animistic sort of way. And it's a mixture of Islam and that. Some groups believe that there's really no difference between folk Islam and Orthodox Islam now, because almost every group of Muslims have some sort of folk thing going on. In Jordan, if you what's the name of the town? In the sorry, mind blank. Ma'an. Everybody in Jordan knows if you want a love potion or you want to kill somebody, you go to Ma'an and you either get a love potion or you put a curse on them in Ma'an, because that's a magical place full of witches and they know that that's where you go. You find someone in Ma'an. And so every group has that kind of thing going on within it. This is a hand of Fatima. They oftentimes put things. You'll see of Muslims, and they'll put stuff on their rear view mirror. And although that's a really kind of a Western kind of looking one, but it's supposed to ward off the evil eye. And you'll see these kind of things because if somebody is jealous of you in certain ways, then that'll bring a demonic presence into you. and they put this oftentimes on children, so that.
I'm sorry.
I know it's a Western one. It's supposed to be jewelry, but they have these things. They're kind of they look like a little hand.
But a Muslim would put that on his mirror?
Oh yeah, maybe not.
That's the Star of David.
The Star of David is just a symbol.
In Hebrew, it's called a hamsa.
Yeah, but you know, you might have a Saudi or something, but they don't, it's the hand of Fatima. Forget the symbols that are on it.
Oh.
Forget the symbols that are on it, because that's done for Western to sell to the West. But the hand of Fatima is oftentimes used to ward off the evil eye, and then oftentimes they put the that Quran is only about this big, and they put it in a little gold case, and they'll put that on the roof, because the Quran for a lot of them is magical. They believe, like, for example, remember I told you yesterday that you read the Quran in Arabic or you don't read it at all?
Mm-hmm.
If you're a Muslim and you don't speak Arabic, what do? You read the Quran in Arabic. Doesn't mean you understand any of it. But you read it in Arabic because there's a magical component to it as far as they're concerned. There's a spirituality behind it. All right. If you can kind of get this, I call this a line of orthodoxy, to where at one end you got a very traditionalist, and on the other end a very modernism. And so Muslims kind of fit somewhere on this line of orthodoxy between very traditionalist Muslims and very modern Muslims. Okay? And then we're going to call it a bisecting line of spiritualism, to where at the bottom, someone that is not very spiritually minded at all, to where at the top, someone's very spiritual. You understanding this graph? So for example, if you see the little red dot in the corner, someone could be a very traditional Muslim and yet not be very spiritual. You know, maybe wear the traditional clothing, wear the thobe, be very, very traditional minded, have a very structured family in an Islamic sort of way, and yet not be very spiritual. Maybe not go to prayer. Okay? To where on the other side you could have somebody who's very modern in their thinking, maybe a 7th century revelationist, but yet is very spiritually minded, and yet go to prayer 5 times a day. You see what I'm saying? And then you could have, again, someone who's very traditional, very spiritual, and someone who's very modern and not spiritual. But what you find is, for the most part, the Muslims tend to congregate somewhere around the center. That's where most Muslims really lie. There is, in a real sense, a pull for modernism. You know, the first time I saw a cell phone was with a Bedouin. You know what a Bedouin is? These nomads that live out in the desert in Arabia. They got the pickup truck, they've got their tent, and they got a cell phone, and they got a satellite dish. That's the first time I ever saw that kind of stuff. I was like, what in the world? You got a Bedouin guy with a cell phone? I didn't have a cell phone. So there's this pull for modernism, and yet this strong, strong pull for traditionalism. And so they're always battling within themselves where they fit on this line. And there's this real battle within themselves where they should go. When I talk about, and here in a second we're going to talk about Sharia law, all Muslims believe that if you bring in Sharia law, that it brings in a utopia, a Shangri-La, if you will. It'll bring in absolute perfection into the nation. They believe that. But they don't want to live there. I've never met a Muslim who says, ooh, I want to live in that spot. You talk to Afghanis, they want to get out of Afghanistan. They don't want to live there because of the Sharia law. How is that? It's because there's this tug of war between modernism and traditionalism. Rites of passage. Males have to be circumcised. There's sons of Abraham. Yeah.
What year? 8 days.
No. 8 tradition is 14. I think, isn't it 14?
No, Ishmael was circumcised at 13.
Was it?
Yeah.
But they have to be circumcised by that year. And so they still do that because, okay, now I'm going to cloud up the issue just a little bit more. I'm sorry if I'm clouding up issues, but what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to get a Muslim thinking so that we understand their perspectives. Okay, are you following me on this? Okay. As far as they're concerned, they are children of Abraham, and so because they're children of Abraham, they are part and parcel of the Abrahamic covenant. Are you following me on this?
Yeah.
They still think that. They still think in terms of this. So therefore, they should be equal partners then to the promised land that God promised to Abraham and his generations. Are you following me on this? Mm-hmm. So, as far as they're concerned, when the promised land was divided up, they were once again taken out of their inheritance. All right, okay? That's all I'm going to say about that. And circumcision. Now, I will say this also. Not about that, changing subject, but keeping on circumcision. There is female circumcision that is done amongst some cultures in the Islamic world. Who is the biggest proponent? Who is the one person who really wants to push for female circumcision? Who wants to do that? The mother. The mothers want their daughters to be circumcised. Why? Glad you asked. That's a question. Why? Because Islam is all about community. So if I have something, I want to share it with that next generation so that we all share it together. It's an event that the women all come together. Men aren't there at female circumcision. Men don't initiate it. Men aren't around for it. Men don't normally even care about it. It's the mothers who get the women in the community all together, and they take their daughters somewhere and they circumcise the daughters together. It's all about that sense of community. They've all had it done to them, and they want to pass it on to that next generation. Okay?
Is that in all Muslim women?
No, it's not. It's in certain groups. It's illegal in a lot of Muslim countries. It's technically illegal in Egypt, but yet the Egyptians probably do it more than any.
It's never talked about.
It's not talked about, no.
And it results in tremendous health issues.
Mm-hmm.
I have been a nurse for many women that have been absolutely mutilated.
Mm-hmm.
And the health issues that surround it make them very unclean. And it's really crazy because they become so smelly, literally, that people don't want to be with them, so they're doing things that make them unclean.
Mm-hmm.
It makes no sense.
But there it is. Marriage. Now, in Islam, polygamy is allowed. You're allowed, as a man, you're allowed 4 wives. Let me just say that what this really translates into, very quickly, is that the very, very wealthy get married to more than one wife, or the very, very poor get married to more than one wife. Because technically speaking, in Islam, you're supposed to treat each wife exactly the same. So, for example, if one wife gets a toaster, all wives get a toaster. That's how that works out. You'll see oftentimes in the Middle East, you'll see cul-de-sacs where there's like 3 or 4 houses, and they look exactly the same. It's because it's owned by the same family, and each wife gets exactly the same house. If they have an apartment, then each wife has to have an apartment that looks exactly the same. Are you following me on this? So, if you're very, very wealthy, you can afford to do this. If you're very, very poor, if one wife gets a tent, they all get a tent. Who cares, you know? If one gets a goat, they all get a goat, you know? But the middle class, they can't normally afford to do that. So even though it's permissible, it doesn't happen so much. Not as much as you would think. Okay? Marriageable age differs between people group and nation and nation. Generally, according to Islam, it is permissible at the age that the woman or the girl begins her monthly cycle. That's when they're allowed to legally get married under Islam, but a lot of nations have their own rules. I think in Jordan it was 16. Some countries are now 18. You know, it depends on nation to nation, people to people. But by Islamic standards, it's at that age of when the woman begins her cycle. Now, let me say that generally, in Islamic culture, a man is supposed to have everything ready for his wife when he takes his wife. So let's say you're from a middle class family. You then have to have an apartment ready for your wife. You have to have all the amenities for the wife so that you basically bring her into the home. Okay? So a man's working to get a wife, and so what you find is that there's oftentimes a big age difference between the husband and the wife, because the man's working to get to the point where he can then afford to have a wife. Okay? So
he could be in his 30s.
Yeah, and have a 16-year-old wife. Yeah, 17-year-old wife. Yeah, it can happen. Okay, divorce. Islam allows divorce. It's very frequently happens in Islam. If you're marrying how do I put this? Let's say that you're going to marry somebody. You come to an agreement beforehand how this is going to work out. So your father would discuss with the bride's-to-be's father how much their family is going to pay the bride for the chance to get married. Okay?
The bride, not the bride's family.
Right, the bride. The bride. Why is this? Because eventually, if divorce happens, and it could, then the bride has some money to live on. So as a father, and if you have a daughter and you love your daughter, you're going to set a high standard that that family would have to pay for my daughter, so that when and if divorce happens, she can afford to live off whatever she's got from that. So again, this is one of those reasons why that oftentimes the male has to wait to get married. Am I making myself clear?
Yes.
Okay. If I'm not, some of you look confused.
That in the Muslim faith, the women can't divorce the husband, but the husband can divorce.
That's right. That's right. And according to the faith, all it requires is for the husband to say, "I divorce you 3 times." However, nationally and by the laws of the land, that there may be other things required. Okay.
So when the man pays the future bride this monies, when they enter into marriage, he doesn't take that money?
No, it's her money.
So he don't get to use that money?
No, it's her money. That's hers. And she's supposed to, yeah.
It's usually given in gold.
Yeah, it's usually given in gold. We'll talk about gold later. But
We've had ladies come into school looking absolutely devastated. The world has ended, and they won't have their gold on us, and my husband didn't. That's not only have they been rejected, but the husband has stolen her gold.
yeah, that would be the ultimate. That'd be the ultimate in betrayal, because he's betraying his own culture. In the Middle East, it is illegal for Christians to divorce. It is actually illegal for Christians to divorce. They can't do it. It is one of the deciding factors that really, as far as Christians have drawn a line in the sand and said, we culturally do not divorce at all, period. We are not those people. They divorce, we do not. It is a big, big issue. Then you get the birth of the first male child. Now, moving on. When somebody is a kid and they grow up, they're kids. They're kids until they get married. Okay? They're kids. So if you are 29 years old and you're not married, you're still a kid. As far as everyone's concerned, you're a kid. You get married. All right? You get married, the clock is ticking. You then have 1 year. That clock's ticking. The wife had better be showing something happening in a year, if you know what I mean. You know what I'm saying? There better be a child on the way. Because now you get that child. Now, when you get that first male child, you're no longer a kid. Then you're an adult. You're a man. Your identity changes. For the man, he becomes the father of that child. I think they do that also in Hebrew somewhat, bin, whatever. Well, they do that in Arabic, it's ibn. So, again, sister-related language. So they call themselves the son or the father of whatever, and they become the son is the son of whatever, and the identity of the family changes. So now they're man, and there's a status involved in this, a very big status change. Now, what happens if there's not a son? Well, technically speaking, if there's not a son, that is a reason for divorce. And again, it's always the woman's fault. Even though we know biologically that's not the case, it is always the woman's fault. So it is a reason for divorce. However, if the husband loves his wife, and let me say that very often the husband does love his wife. Okay, I'm not saying that they're waiting for that opportunity to divorce and everything. Divorce happens, and it happens a lot, yes. But a lot of people, husbands and wives, do love each other. It happens, believe me. And they're going to stick through it thick and thin. And I've known people who had daughters, and they still stay married. And they eventually, when they get to a certain age, they start getting up there in the years, and the daughters get old, they'll start calling them by the daughter's name. Okay? So it just as a sign of respect. Okay, you know, it's because respect for the elderly is still respect for the elderly.
You know, Matt, we had a case in point at the end of the year how Miriam from Iraq was pregnant with her third daughter, and the mother-in-law was begging her to kill herself with the child and end the family shame.
God.
And every day she come in and she just looks devastated. She says, they're telling me I have to kill myself and the baby and end the family shame. This is the third daughter, like 27 years old.
So those things happen. Anyway, moving on. Sharia law. Sharia law, which we hear a lot about, is based upon the Quran and the Hadith, and it's done by a consensus. Now, there were actually four schools of law, and I think there's still two of them that still exist today. And basically, what they do is they go over the Hadith, they go over the Quran, and say this is what Sharia law is. However, when it gets down to the people, Sharia law changes a little bit according to what the tribe says Sharia law is and what the nations say Sharia law is. Even though there's these schools of law, when it gets right down to it, it's whoever's enforcing it that matters. Okay? It encompasses religious law, civil law, and criminal law. In Islam, you do not separate your religion from your nation. When we have, and we do have several elected officials in our Congress, who are Muslim. And no matter what you say, they are really not going to ever separate Islam from what they're doing on Capitol Hill. It's never going to happen. You can say, and they could say they will, but it won't, because by the nature of Islam, Islam encompasses everything. One of the things I found very interesting is I read one of Jimmy Carter's books, and I'm curious about the guy. He got pretty much elected because he ran as a Christian. I know my family voted for him because he was Christian and born again. But in his book, one of his books, and I can't remember the title off the top of my head because he's written several, but he was talking about how he made political decisions. And he said, because I have to separate religion and state, I would look at the Christian way of doing things, and I would vote the exact opposite of what my faith said I should do. Well, no wonder he failed. I'm just saying that was how he said he made his decisions. Anyway, that's never going to happen for a Muslim. It's just not. They're going to vote their faith. Sharia law is applied by direct command. If the Quran says to do something, the Hadith say to do something, you do it. And also by analogy. For example, the Quran says that you shouldn't drink alcohol, so by analogy, you shouldn't take drugs. Does that make sense? So therefore, drugs are illegal, which is kind of weird because most heroin comes from Afghanistan. Yes, but nevertheless,
they just grow the plant. They don't do the drug.
It's okay to make money from it.
Yeah,
but just don't do it.
They just don't do it. But now that kind of weird sort of thing happens. Anyway, wherever Sharia law is applied, there is a demodernization. Remember that line of orthodoxy. Sharia law is on the traditional side, very much so, and it fights very strongly against modernization. And so wherever Sharia law is implemented, there is a big-time demodernization, to the point where they will get rid of anything that strikes at modernism. In Saudi Arabia, the king of Saudi that allowed television to come into the country was assassinated by his own nephew because he brought this cursed TV into the nation. It's a big, big thing about demodernization. When you look at what happened in Afghanistan, yes, Lord. It's a prime example of what happened. Education went down, health went down, the life of all the people declined, the age of living declined almost by half because of the Sharia law being implemented.
And where's this utopia? Yeah.
Again, remember talking about sometimes what they say happens and what the reality is isn't the same, and they know that, but that doesn't matter. Every Muslim I ever talk to will talk about when Sharia law comes in, and they want it to happen in the United States. Talk to a Muslim, oh yeah, when Sharia law comes, this country will be so awesome, everything will be great, it'll be perfect.
But these are the same people that are fleeing Sharia law.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Like I said, they want it implemented, they just don't want to live under it.
So implement it over there, not where I'm at.
It's just one of those things that it doesn't seem to make sense, but to them it does.
I'm trying real hard. Real hard.
Okay. Let's talk about education. This is from the Islamic Education Center in Houston, Texas. They're really big on education in Islam, and most learning is done by rote. Who knows what rote is? Repetition. There you go. You learn it, and you learn it, and you learn it, and you memorize it. As a matter of fact, in the Middle East, at least in Jordan, they have in order to get into university, you have to take an exam called the Tawjihi. They give you the answers to the test beforehand. You memorize it, letter for letter, punctuation mark for punctuation mark, so that when you go to take the test, which is pages long, you start writing. And you write exactly the answer that they told you to write. Okay? You memorize it. Now, what this does for them is, I'll tell you what, a lot of people that are from Islam, you meet them years later, and they'll tell you word for word the conversations you've had. They got that type of memory that they've memorized. They've got that memory. Okay? But what it doesn't do is it doesn't allow them to be able to analyze. Are you seeing what I'm talking about? And our education system at one time did try to teach us to analyze, and we do less and less of that all the time. So anyway, in an Islamic education system, there is no choice. The whole purpose then is to indoctrinate. When my son was going to school, in his mathematics class, they would have Quranic verses that they had to memorize to pass the math class. Now, what did that have to do with math? Absolutely nothing. But the purpose of education is to indoctrinate, not to educate. Now, I will say this, and I'll end with this on this subject. I homeschooled. Ishmael and I did homeschool. We left homeschooling. But schooling should never be the reason for indoctrination. I believe in Christian education. Okay, yes, I do. But I want to teach my kids to think. I really, really believe that Christianity is logical. I believe that our faith isn't just some pie-in-the-sky thing. I think it's real. I think there's real evidence and proof of Jesus Christ and His atoning work. I really believe that. And I believe it stands on its own 2 feet. And I want my children to be able to come to those same conclusions on their own. Now, I'm going to show them those evidences and proofs, but I am not there to indoctrinate them. I'm there to let them have the tools required to be able to use what God gives them. Okay? Enough said on that. Let's take a 5-minute break.
Because what they say, yeah, I'm thinking like after stick and add the all right.
So you feel the whole.
Oh, okay. I turn on the sound system. I see the shuffle. Just turn on oh, the rehearsal stuff.
Oh, I'm kind Really? Yeah, I mean, I can special say that's
See, RJ,
Yes.
You know, I thought about coming in Oh no. Looks like the accident done. Yeah, the accident. Got some green tea.
I turned them on to I told them about it. And the board, it's just right. It's not because the Fletcher's
If you look, you know, you're not bothering me.
They brought her two grandkids outside.
That's the first thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Wait.
Because I paid all at Phillips. I paid at Bubba Gum. And a cup of gumbo. Fat
Oh, I'm in the last. Thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. You're welcome.
Unfortunately, surprise birthday parties to go to, we have to be there for the surprise birthday. Thank you so much for everything.
Everything.
All right. We can make our way back to our seats. We still have a lot to cover.
What time are we going to there?
Till 1.
As you were talking, I was thinking, a lot of the stuff I see similar to what is shared in this culture too.
Very similar.
Especially, you know, family had a household, the importance of the first meal. All of that very similar.
In a sense, it's a return to the law from the grace of the New Testament. It's almost a return back to the law. It's very similar in a lot of ways to Judaism.
It's functional. But they don't want to hear it.
No.
I just got
Yeah. All right, if we can take our seats and so we can start. All right. This next, I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as possible because we want to get out of here by 1, and it's 11:23. So I'm going to have to really kind of push on. 5 pillars of Islam. Remember I said that Islam is a religion based on what you do, not necessarily what you believe? This is what you do, and it's called the 5 pillars. First one is the creed, and the creed is actually, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the apostle of God. In Arabic it sounds like La ilaha illallah wa Muhammad Rasulullah. And often, if you say that to a Muslim, you are a Muslim. You have Islamed, you have converted, you have submitted to Islam. And so oftentimes, I've met Muslims who say, "Oh, you're a great guy. You should just be a Muslim. Just repeat after me." And they'll say the creed, and I'll laugh at them and say, "No, I'm not going to do that."
But you just said,
you know what? It has no power over me. But I'm just saying, for his benefit, I'm not going to do that for him. The first part is called the negation and affirmation. Negation, there is no God. Affirmation, but God. And the second part changes with the office. Remember I told you there were 6 titled prophets. And what they believe is that Islam is the religion of God, and so Islam is the religion that started back with Adam. And so Adam was a good Muslim. And so as Islam has changed with each new titled prophet, for example, when it got to Abraham, then it would have been there's no God but God, and Abraham is the friend of God. They believe that that's what actually happened. Now again, it didn't happen, but nevertheless, they believe it did. There is a declaration of faith, but it's not the creed. And the declaration of faith is, I believe in God, His angels, His books, His apostles, and the last day. That doesn't make you a Muslim. You know, you can believe those things, but there's such a wide variance again on that belief that it doesn't really matter. So creed makes you a Muslim. Prayer. I want to show you this picture. I'm going to turn off the light so you can see it. And you still can't see it. It's too dark in there.
No, I can.
Can you?
Yeah.
Let me. Can someone turn off the lights back there? So I just want to show you the picture. Thanks. I want you to see it a little bit clearer. This picture is actually, I took this picture in the mosque in Damascus. Wow. And there, that helps a little bit. And you can see there's a double row of people. These are all men up here. And notice they're all doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. Thanks, sweetie. Just turn that light back on. You can see my beautiful face. To you, what is prayer? What would you say? What is prayer?
Talking, communicating with God.
Talking to God, I hear. For the most part, it has nothing to do with prayer as far as the Muslims are concerned. Has absolutely zero to do with prayer. It is a religious duty that you must perform because God has dictated that you perform it because God dictated that you perform it. That's all prayer is. Now, do they say it to God? Yes, but because God said to do it. Remember, God's transcendent. He's not interested in communication with you. He doesn't want you to talk to Him. He doesn't want to talk to you. Okay? That's how they look at it. So prayer is all about just doing what you got to do because you got to do it. So there's a ceremonial cleansing that you got to do in order to perform your prayer. Because everybody's unclean, you got to wash your face, you got to wash your hands, wipe your feet. But if there's no water available, then you are free to use sand to do that. So grab a handful of sand and scrub your face with it. And that'll make you clean. And of course, you pray towards Mecca. Before the Jews rejected Muhammad, they used to pray towards Jerusalem. And then when the Jews rejected Muhammad as a prophet, then they changed the direction of prayer to Mecca. There's a prescribed number of bowings and statements. I'm not going to go into that, but you do it 5 times a day. The first time the time you pray is the time you're supposed to be able to distinguish a white thread from a black thread, and that's somewhere around 4 o'clock in the morning-ish, somewhere around that time, and then that's the first prayer of the day. It's taught at the age of 7, and you must pray by the age of 10.
In most communities, they are called to prayer.
Yeah, there's a call to prayer. And so it goes on at like I said, that first one's in the early morning, then there's noon, and then there's an afternoon, and then there's a sundown prayer, and then there's an hour after sundown. So. Whole purpose of every one of these 5 pillars is it's community-based. You do the shahadi in front of Muslims to become a Muslim. Everyone does prayer at the exact same time, doing it the exact same way, in the exact same fashion, all together. It's about building a sense of community. Okay? Fasting. The month of Ramadan is fasting. So guess what? They all fast during the same time of the year. During the month of Ramadan, they fast from sunrise, which was when? About 4 o'clock in the morning, whenever you can distinguish the threads. So that's when the sunrise is, up until the sun sets below the horizon. So they can't, during that time, there's no food, drink, and I included medicine during those daylight hours. There's also no smoking and no carousing. I'll just put it that way. Okay. Huh?
There's no smoking and no carousing.
No smoking or carousing during daylight hours. However,
carousing usually happens after
but when the sun goes down, it is party time.
Amen. Hallelujah.
Party with a capital P. Okay. Actually, more food is consumed during the month of Ramadan than any other time of the year. So, as far as fasting goes, it's. But you know, considering if it's in the, it's coming up.
Does Ramadan
started, didn't it?
always fall in the summer?
What's that? No, it doesn't. Now, the Islamic calendar, which I'll talk about a little bit, but I'll just talk about it now, which is bypass it later, is a lunar calendar. So it changes by about 10 days every year, so it kind of advances. So eventually it ends up going all the way around our calendar, all around the seasons. But moves forward by about 10 days every year. So anyway, technically speaking, Ramadan does not have to be performed by pregnant women and the infirm, and for those traveling. However, there are nations and countries and peoples where it is enforced. And so they don't distinguish whether you're pregnant or infirm or traveling or not. If you're in the hospital and they think you can get by without medicine, they will let you get by without medicine. So the use of painkillers cuts way down. Now, let me move. Did I say this? Yeah. Breakfast. Let's talk about breakfast. Breakfast is called iftar, and that you can eat them when the sun goes down. And if you ever get invited to an iftar, I recommend going. It's an interesting situation because I don't know if it is a Christian event, you would expect some sort of prayer and some sort of, I guess, pomp that would go with such an event. There is no pomp. It's people with plate in hand waiting for that. When that sun goes down, shoveling begins. It's a weird situation. Am I right? And they haven't eaten the drink. And actually, in certain places, for example, in in the summertime in places like Bangladesh, where it's hot, it's humid. A number of people die just because they can't drink water during the day, they dehydrate, they die. Well, they look at that as being wow, they died during Ramadan. They perform, woo, it's a great blessing for that, you know. It can be dangerous. If you're in Antarctica and you got Ramadan and you can't eat till sun goes down, and I know 6 months later. I don't know how that would work, but anyway, it's a thing. So again, everyone's doing the exact same thing at the exact same time, and there are certain foods that come out only during Ramadan and things, and it's looked at as being a very joyous occasion. But generally, let me just say something about the spiritual climate. For those who live in predominant Muslim areas, you can actually feel it when it starts to get close to Ramadan. You can feel it. It's tangible. You know, I was in the Air Force, and I talked to that. The first time I got contact with Muslim people, I was in the Air Force, and I was sent to Saudi Arabia. And I had never experienced anything like that before. And I'm not talking, you could feel it, and it was so oppressive. And I was just like, oh my God, these people live in this. And it's like a weight on your shoulders when you get there. And the next time I went, because I went 6 different times, and the next time I went, I was prepared for it, I was ready for it, so I was like hyped up, read up, and prayed up, and ready to go. But that first time, it whacked me hard upside the head. You know, it was just tough. But as you approach into Ramadan, you start feeling, if you're in those Muslim areas, you feel that oppression, and it builds. And people's tempers begin to rise, and people are angry, and so when you get to Ramadan, they haven't eaten all day. When it starts getting up towards breakfast time, they're grouchy, they're cranky. It's not pleasant at all, and accidents, car accidents, go through the roof in Islamic areas because everyone's trying to get home, and they're in car accidents. But guess what? If you're in a Muslim area, you have a car accident, it's getting close to iftar, no one's going to help you because it's breakfast time and they got to go home and eat. So the death toll rises. Wow. It just does. But interestingly, when you watch on television about shows about Ramadan, they all talk about it being this peaceful time where everybody reflects and everybody has an appreciation for the poor, and everybody does, everybody's doing it together, and this family life, and it's just this Shangri-La that's kind of purported, but it doesn't really exist.
So just could you give us some insight on how you came to these conclusions about everything being chaotic? I mean, where are you looking in? How do you get this information?
I got this information by firsthand. Like I said, I lived in the Middle East for 10 years. I've traveled extensively throughout the Middle East. I've been in Turkey, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon. I've been to Saudi Arabia. I've been Usha's been, my wife, she's been to Kuwait. We've both been to Egypt. I've been to Burkina Faso as you. I've been to Nigeria, been to Russia and the Islamic areas, and I've been to Dearborn, Michigan on a number of occasions. So I've even seen it here. I actually have a friend who's working in Dearborn, and he's the only Christian on his street. And he tells me, he said to me, one time I was visiting, he said, I forget sometimes that the entire United States isn't like this. And some, I was in Syria. I was in Damascus, and I was visiting a Christian family, and somehow we got connected with him. Usha met a family here in the United States, and he'd asked me to take some money to his family, and so we looked him up there and we had communion with him, and I took my boss and my boss's boss, and we'd all went. And my the president of our organization, he only spoke English, and so he was talking to the kids who were pharmacists because pharmacists have to learn English. And my boss, my direct boss, he was in Russia for a number of years, and so he spoke Russian. And one kid went to Russia for schooling, so he was talking to him in Russian. And I spoke Arabic, so I'm talking to the old patriarch of the group. And he was telling me, and I'm translating for my friends, and he said, you know, I'm a Christian, and I live in a home here on a Muslim street, in a Muslim neighborhood, in a Muslim city, in a Muslim country. He says, I love Jesus, but Jesus has forgotten us.
Wow.
Jesus doesn't love us anymore. If you can imagine what these people have to go through, they feel totally isolated. When you think about Lebanon was created to be a Christian nation originally. It was supposed to be a Christian nation amongst all the Muslims. It was kind of carved out so that Christians would have a place for safety and security. By law there, the president has to be Christian, though because of the minority that there is a Muslim vice president. When the Civil War broke out and the Muslims began to say, hey, we're not going to allow this Christian country to exist as a Christian country, literally the Christians thought that the West would come to their aid and come in, and because after all, we're all Christians and we're going to support and build each other up. And it didn't happen, and they were confused. So, yeah, firsthand, I've seen a lot of what's going on, and it's not.
Is Lebanon still Christian?
No, now it's still confused.
Thank you.
So, anyway, moving right along. Pilgrimage, the Hajj. The pilgrimage is known as the Hajj. If you guys remember, there was a show years ago, a cartoon called Johnny Quest, and he had a friend called Haji. A Haji was somebody who's been on a Hajj. That's what Haji means. And they had a Sikh guy who was named confusing. Anyway, has to go on. You have to shave your head to do your washing. Remember your ceremonial washing that you do. Then men have to shave their heads. Women, they're allowed to keep hair up to the fingernail width, so they get a little bit of hair. And but you also clip your fingernails because everyone knows that the jinn live under your fingernails, so that's part of your cleansing process. You clip your fingernails, your toenails. And then you wear a garment called an ihram. It's just a long white kind of sari. You know what a sari is, like the Indians wear? It's kind of like that. They wrap it around themselves, and then they go on the Hajj. You're supposed to do it once in your lifetime. It's not something you do every year, every week, but everyone does it again at the same time of the year. It's the time for the Hajj, and so it's Hajj time, and then they go. So that's when they do it. If you can picture this here's where Mecca is, and there's kind of this valley that kind of runs through there, and there's these little towns or little villages along the way, Arafat, Muzdalifa, Mina, and these are actually mountains right here, if you can kind of picture this. And then they have to walk through these little places, and they offer these prayers along the way in order to get to Mecca, where the grand mosque is, where the Kaaba is. Remember I showed you the picture of the Kaaba, the big black building. And then so the prayers are offered there at Mina, Arafat, Muzdalifa, and there's a slaughter of sacrifice done. They still slaughter sacrifices. Each family is supposed to do one, and they eat some of the meat, and then they give the rest to the poor. Then, whoops, let me look back here. Then they're supposed to walk around the Kaaba 7 times. 7 times they walk around that. Now, each time, let me see, yeah. Each time that they walk around, they're supposed to, by the law, Islamic law, they're supposed to try to touch that black stone. Remember I told you about the black stone where where supposedly Ishmael would have been offered up. Well, they're supposed to touch that black stone or kiss it if possible. Now, I think that kind of, again, sounds a little bit like they're worshiping the stone, but I don't go there. You don't talk about that. They don't talk about that either. But now, what they've done now is they say you can no longer do that, but according to tradition, that's what you're supposed to do. But each time that you walk around that, you're supposed to yell Allahu Akbar. So it's a very noisy place during the Hajj. There's hundreds and thousands, well, not hundreds of thousands, but there's certainly thousands of people walking around this thing and trying to get into this thing at a time. I don't know if you guys remember, but I guess it was probably about 15 years ago. There was a large group of Iranians that were trampled to death during the Hajj. And so they look at that again. They're doing this thing on the Hajj, and they die in the process. It's a great blessing. So it's a big thing.
So then all of this is what Malcolm X did?
Yes, exactly what Malcolm X did.
He walked through all these different steps.
Yeah, he walked through all these steps. And what they do is, because you can imagine there's people all over the world coming at the same time, all doing the same thing, they put guys in camps. There's no room in the city, obviously. So they have these tent cities that's all around Mecca, and they group them up according to nationality. And so, you'd have all the Turks together, all the Americans together, all the Saudis together, so everybody's all in their groups. There's not this kind of, I know Malcolm X kind of said that, he saw it and he didn't see people because they're all dressed the same, but nevertheless, they keep everybody separate. Okay. They still keep everybody separate. So anyway, then you travel between Safa and Marwa. Safa is the place where Hagar dropped Ishmael, and then Marwa is where the water was found. And so supposedly they travel between Safa and Marwa in remembrance of Ishmael. And then they stone the three Jamra. It's these kind of I don't know what you call them, kind of like stone columns that have been created. I don't know how or why. And they, as a symbol of throwing rocks at the devil. So they stone the Jamra. And then they can visit the Prophet's mosque in Medina. And then they return to Mecca, and that finishes the Hajj. Now there's actually a lot of books written on how to do this, and there's some, again, variations, but that's predominantly what you do. The whole process takes about a week by the time you get your group in there to do the walking around, and everything's done on foot from the time you begin. So if you walk up to the Prophet's mosque in Medina, you got to walk that distance, and then you walk back.
And about how far is that to that valley from Medina?
Yeah.
How far?
I think that's 7 miles. Yeah. And you can imagine there's also infirm people that do this, and they're allowed to take somebody to help them through the process. So, but it's a as you can imagine, it's a process. Now, what this does for Saudi Arabia is it brings in a lot of big money. so it is a money thing. And the whole pilgrimage, the whole Hajj thing, all the way from the very beginning, it was about money, bringing people into Mecca to bring in the money, right from the beginning.
Can you hire someone to do it for you, the wall?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. It's not done too much because, it's expensive to do. And besides that, it's one of these, for the most part, it could be a once-in-a-lifetime thing, unless you're very, very wealthy. And so, as a once-in-a-lifetime thing, you want to do it yourself. So, but you can do it, but it's not done too often. Alms is given. Again, it's 2.5%. Yeah, it should be 2.5. They believe, though, that God repays you back twice the amount. Now, that 2.5% is not a tithe. It doesn't go necessarily to the mosque. What it means is you give. You can give to anybody. And so for some of the poorer families, the fact that you did the slaughter of sacrifice, you've given the meat away to the poor, as far as they're concerned, they've done the alms. Okay? Other religious, how am I doing for time here?
Quarter
Okay.
to.
Oh, we're doing fine. Other religious, let's talk jihad. The Quran says, fight against them until idolatry is no more and God's religion reigns supreme. But if they desist, fight none except the evildoers. They're supposed to fight against pagans, idolaters, unbelievers, and those who wage war against God or against God's religion. So in other words, as long as you resist Islam, jihad is against you.
Yeah, but then the Sunnis think that Shias are idolaters, and
Yeah,
so they're
sure.
whacking each other.
Sure. I don't think they're idolaters, but they think they're in error. They also think the Sufis are in error, and a lot of other groups are in error. Bottom line is, let Islam do whatever it wants to do whenever it wants to do it, then technically speaking, according to the Quran, there is a jihad against you. So until you submit, you're under jihad.
And don't Muslims, how I want to say this, that the enemy of my enemy is my enemy. In other words, they will fight amongst each other.
Yeah.
But they will all turn against.
Right. When push comes to shove, Muslims will always cite Muslims over Christians or anybody else. Yeah, absolutely. That's true. There are feasts. Eid al-Adha is after the Hajj. It's to commemorate Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Ishmael. Again, sheep is sacrificed, eaten, and given away. Then there's the Eid al-Fitr, and Eid means feast. It means feast. This begins on the completion of Ramadan. It's a 3-day holiday. During this time, oftentimes children get brand new clothes or a little toy. It's sort of like their Christmas, but they don't obviously have Christmas. But at this time during the holidays, during the Eid, that's when you visit. And the visit doesn't have to take long. You can visit for 5-10 minutes, and you visit and you kind of snack on chocolates or whatever, and you wish them a happy Eid, and you move on to the next family that you know. It's a real time of visits. On the plus side, Christmas is known as Eid Milad, the feast of the birth. During Christmas time, as a Christian, because it is a feast and they understand the nature of feasts, you can get by with a lot of evangelism during Christmas that you can't get with otherwise. I would drive through the Middle East dressed as Santa Claus. And as Santa Claus, I could pass out Bibles. I passed out candy to the kids with Bible verses tied to each other. I went to the Saudi embassy and gave Bibles dressed as Santa Claus to the guards standing outside the Saudi embassy, and they received them with great thanksgiving.
Because it was a holiday?
It was a holiday. It's my holiday as a Christian. It's my Eid. And they're going to respect that. You can get by with a lot if you're willing to do it. Islamic New Year. It's again it's on the lunar calendar. They celebrate that. Oftentimes they celebrate Muhammad's birthday. Laylatul Miraj. Layla means night. Miraj. Well, what's a mirage? What?
It's an illusion.
It's an illusion. Something that people see but didn't happen, kind of thing. This commemorates the ascension of Muhammad. Remember I told you about one of those things that they say happened but didn't happen? It's the Laylatul Miraj. Then there's dietary laws. The dietary laws are halal, very similar to kosher, very similar. They cannot eat carrion. Carrion, everyone knows what carrion is? Roadkill. Roadkill. Yeah. Can't eat things that die on their own. Blood, pork, or anything consecrated in the name of another god. Now, when let's say you have halal chicken. I hope I don't ruin your chicken for you. But halal chicken is done like this. Okay, I don't know if any of you ever worked in a meat processing plant, but what you have is you have a belt that goes with little clips on. You take a chicken and you stick the feet onto the clips so the chicken's hanging down, going this way, and he goes down the conveyor belt, and eventually you get to a point where there's a couple blades that chop the head off. Okay? And this conveyor belt's going like this. Well, to make it halal, there's a guy that stands there, and every chicken that goes down there, he goes, Bismillah, 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 Bismillah. And that's his job. That makes it halal. Bismillah in the name of God.
Oh, man. I thought there was some more process. Oh.
So that's halal. Now,
it's blessed.
It's blessed. But it's also had its head cut off, so it bleeds out. It can't just die on its own. Okay? So, and that's, and they can't also, I don't have this on the list, but they can't have alcohol either. No alcohol. So if you have a Muslim over, nothing cooked in alcohol, nothing cooked in pork. If you have an possum that you picked up off the road, don't serve that. I got to say that for the Southerners. But anyway, and be aware that when they do visit, they're going to think that it's unclean. They're going to think that it's pork. They're going to think that you're putting alcohol in it because they know that as a Christian, you're a bunch of drunkard, pork-eating slobs. You're just disgusting. You're unclean. You're unclean. Okay, that's what they think. And so don't be surprised if your Muslim friends come over and they're going to happily sit at your table, they're going to pick up their knife and their fork, and they're going to play with the food. They might even bring it up to their mouth, and they'll put it back down, and they'll play with it, and they'll play with it, and play with it. But don't be surprised if they don't eat anything. Don't be offended by that, okay? It's worse than if you don't serve them anything. That's far worse, okay? It may take a while before they trust you enough to think that, okay, they're not going to serve me pork. It may take a while. Just saying. Okay, does that make sense?
What if you say that you bought it in a halal store? That you didn't.
You might say that, and like I said, they may eat, but don't be surprised if they don't. They don't know what process you did. You could have put some bacon fat in there and fried it up. They don't know. So it may take a while for them, to figure out if you're going to be true to them or not.
So it's a thing of trust.
It is. It is a thing of trust. All right. We got through that real fast. Let's take 5 minutes.
Okay, wait a minute. Why don't we have the blessing on the food, eat, and then come back?
Okay, that's good.
The food's already set and ready to go.
All right. When we bless food?
Yes.
Okay. Well, hallelujah. Dear Father, thank you, Lord, for what we've learned thus far, and thank you for everyone that's here. And I pray, Lord, that, Lord, this isn't just information, but, Lord, we can use it to build your kingdom. And so, dear Father, we ask that you sanctify the food, nourish it to our body, and bless it, Lord. And I thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Make your eyes cross. Well, there's a store.
The next one's on
Which rows? I don't want to New York.
Right.
I can take that. There's a lot of Yemenite people. Yes. And they have a big sign that says halal. I always thought they had some kind of relationship to what happened.
Oh, okay.
Well, it is the brand. It's the main big deal. Anything else beyond that is kosher. The biblical requirement is written. So in that sense, if it's truly halal, then that's it.
Lunch break.